The ancient scroll crumbled between Lyra's trembling fingers, its silver script pulsing with an otherworldly light that matched the crescent-shaped birthmark now burning against her collarbone. When the last daughter of Moonhaven awakens, the dying light of the celestial dynasty shall either be reborn in love's embrace or be extinguished forever by the shadows of betrayal. The prophecy's words echoed through the abandoned tower as thunder crashed overhead, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the stone walls, a howl rose, ancient, commanding, and undeniably calling to something deep within her soul that had been sleeping for 23 years. Footsteps echoed up the spiral stairs, and Lyra's heart hammered as a voice like midnight velvet reached her ears. "Princess, you shouldn't be reading things that were buried with the old world." She turned to find eyes like molten gold watching her from the shadows, eyes that held centuries of secrets and the weight of oaths sworn in blood. Some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for love to awaken them. Chapter 1. The morning Lyra Ashwith's life changed forever began like any other, with the scent of rain-soaked earth drifting through her bedroom window and the distant sound of her grandmother's voice calling her down for breakfast. She rolled over in bed, her hand instinctively moving to the strange burning sensation at her throat, fingers tracing what felt like raised skin that hadn't been there the night before. "Lyra, come quickly, child." The urgency in Grandmother Celeste's voice sent ice through her veins. Lyra stumbled from bed, catching her reflection in the antique mirror that had belonged to her family for generations. Her breath caught. There, glowing faintly against her pale skin like silver fire, was a crescent moon surrounded by intricate Celtic knotwork, a birthmark that definitely hadn't existed 24 hours ago. She threw on clothes and raced downstairs to find her grandmother standing in the center of their cottage's main room, clutching a wooden box that looked older than the stones of the house itself. Celeste's weathered hands shook as she set it on the kitchen table, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something that looked almost like relief. "Grandmother, what's happening to me?" Lyra's voice cracked as she pointed to her throat. "This mark." "Sit down, sweetheart." Celeste's voice carried a gravity Lyra had never heard before. "It's time you learn the truth about who you really are." The box opened with a soft click, revealing contents that made Lyra's newly awakened mark pulse with recognition. Ancient scrolls tied with silver ribbon. A pendant carved from what looked like moonstone, its surface swirling with inner light. And beneath it all, a leather-bound journal whose pages seemed to whisper secrets in the morning air. "Your mother never wanted you to know," Celeste began, her fingers reverent as she lifted the pendant. "She hoped the bloodline had diluted enough that you could live a normal human life. But the moon's call is too strong, and your 18th birthday has passed. The magic won't be denied anymore." "Magic?" Lyra's laugh came out strangled. "Grandmother, you're scaring me?" "The Ashworth line isn't just old, child. We are the last remnants of the Moonhaven dynasty, the royal house that once ruled all the werewolf packs of the Northern Territories." Celeste's eyes glistened as she placed the pendant around Lyra's neck. The moment the moonstone touched her skin, the world exploded into sensation. Images flooded her mind, vast castles carved into mountainsides, their towers reaching towards star-filled skies. Wolves running through enchanted forests where the very trees pulsed with ancient magic. A great hall filled with beings who were both human and beast, their eyes reflecting the light of a massive silver throne. And through it all, the sound of howling, not of pain, but of joy, of belonging, of home. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to the pendant. "What was that?" "Your inheritance awakening. The memories of your bloodline calling to you." Celeste opened the first scroll, revealing silver script that seemed to move across the parchment. "You are not just any werewolf, Lyra. You are the last heir of the celestial bloodline, descended from the moon goddess herself. And according to this prophecy..." Her voice faltered. "What prophecy?" "The one that says the fate of all our kind rests in your hands. That your choice of mate will either restore our people to their former glory or doom them to extinction." Celeste's eyes fixed on something beyond the window. "And I fear that choice is about to be taken from your hands." A howl echoed across the misty moors surrounding their cottage, low, commanding, and distinctly male. The sound seemed to resonate in Lyra's bones, calling to something primal that she'd never known existed within her. "He's here," Celeste whispered, and for the first time in Lyra's memory, her grandmother looked afraid. "The Guardian. I'd hoped we had more time." "Guardian of what?"
"Of you, child.
"Of the bloodline secrets. Of the oaths sworn by his ancestors to protect the last heir of Moonhaven." Celeste pressed the journal into Lyra's hands. "His family has waited 3 centuries for your awakening, and now that the mark has appeared." The howl came again, closer this time, and with it came the sound of approaching footsteps. Heavy boots on stone, moving with predatory grace toward their front door. Lyra's mark burned hotter, and she could swear she felt something answering within her, a wild, untamed part of her soul stretching its wings for the first time. "Grandmother, I don't understand any of this." "You will, sweetheart. The blood remembers what the mind forgets." Celeste squeezed her hands. "But whatever happens next, remember this. You have choices. The prophecies speaks of fate, but love, true love, makes its own destiny." 3 sharp knocks echoed through the cottage, each one seeming to reverberate through Lyra's chest like a second heartbeat. "Enter," Celeste called, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The door swung open, and Lyra's world tilted on its axis. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill a room before he'd even fully entered it. His hair was dark as a moonless night, and his eyes, God, his eyes were liquid gold, ancient and knowing and fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a long black coat that looked like it had stepped out of another century, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known fear. But it wasn't his devastating handsomeness that made her mark pulse with recognition. It was the way he looked at her, like she was a mystery he'd been trying to solve for lifetimes. "Princess," he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd imagined midnight would sound like if it could speak. "My name is Kieran Blackthorne. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, Princess." Lyra's voice came out as a squeak. The last daughter of the Moonhaven line. The heir to the celestial throne. His golden eyes never left hers as he stepped fully into the cottage. "And if the mark on your throat is any indication, the time for hiding is over." He moved closer and Lyra caught his scent, pine and earth and something wild that made her newly awakened instinct sing. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped and inclined his head in a gesture that looked both respectful and ancient. "My family has served yours for 700 years. We are bound by blood oaths older than memory to protect the royal line until the dynasty can be restored." His eyes met hers again. "I am your guardian, Princess. And now that your powers are awakening, there are those who will stop at nothing to see you dead before you can claim your birthright." The pendant around her neck grew warm, and suddenly Lyra could sense things she'd never noticed before. The way the air hummed with energy around Kieran. The supernatural strength coiled in his muscles. The barely leashed power that seemed to radiate from his very skin. "You're a werewolf," she breathed. "Alpha of the Blackthorne pack. Descendant of the wolf lords who serve your ancestors in the old country." He studied her face carefully. "And you, Princess, are much more than just a werewolf. You are the bridge between the human world and ours. The key to awakening powers that have slept for 3 centuries. I don't know how to be any of those things. You'll learn." The corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. "Your blood knows what your mind doesn't. And I'll be with you every step of the way." Another howl echoed across the moors, but this one was different. Harsh, threatening, filled with violence that made Lyra's mark burn with warning. Kieran's expression hardened instantly. "We need to leave.
Now."
"Leave? But this is my home." "Not anymore." His voice carried the weight of command. "The rival houses have sensed your awakening. They're coming, and they won't hesitate to kill you before you can claim your power." He turned to Celeste. "My lady, you've protected her well, but the time for hiding is over." Celeste nodded grimly. "I know. I've been preparing for this day since she was born." She pressed a small bag into Lyra's hands. Everything you need to know about your heritage is in that journal. Study it well, child. Your life may depend on it. But grandmother will be safe. I'm not as defenseless as I appear. Celeste's eyes flashed with inner fire. Go with him, Lyra. Learn who you were meant to be. The howls were getting closer now, and Kieran moved to the window, his body tense with readiness. Princess, we have perhaps minutes before they arrive. Trust me or not, but choose quickly. Lyra looked between her grandmother and the man who claimed to be her guardian. Everything logical in her mind screamed that this was insane, that people didn't just transform into werewolves overnight, that prophecies were fairy tales, that she was just ordinary Lyra Ashworth who worked at the village library and had never done anything more exciting than organize a book fair. But the mark on her throat pulsed with ancient recognition, and when she looked into Kieran's golden eyes, something deep inside her whispered home. I'll come with you, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Relief flickered across Kieran's features.
Good.
Stay close to me, and whatever happens, don't let go of this. He pressed something cold and solid into her palm, a silver ring carved with the same symbols as her birthmark. The howls erupted into snarls just outside the cottage, and the scent of unknown wolves flooded through the windows. Time's up, Kieran growled, and his voice carried an edge of the beast beneath his human facade. Hold tight, princess. Your real life is about to begin. Chapter 2. The world blurred past in a rush of wind and moonlight as Kieran carried Lyra through the ancient forest that bordered her grandmother's cottage. His supernatural speed should have terrified her, but instead, she felt strangely safe pressed against his chest, his arms like steel bands protecting her from the chaos erupting behind them. The snarls and howls of their pursuers echoed through the trees, growing fainter, but never disappearing entirely. Lyra clutched the silver ring he'd given her, its surface warm against her palm and pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. Where are you taking me? She managed to gasp out. Somewhere they can't follow, Kieran replied, his voice steady despite their breakneck pace. The Sanctuary of Shadows. It's been hidden by bloodline magic for over 300 years. They burst through a wall of what looked like solid mist, and suddenly the forest changed. The trees grew taller here, their bark gleaming with silver veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. Moonlight filtered through leaves that seemed to whisper secrets, and the very air hummed with ancient power that made Lyra's mark sing with recognition. Kieran slowed to a walk, setting her gently on her feet. Welcome to what's left of your kingdom, princess. Lyra's breath caught. Ahead of them, carved into the face of a massive cliff, was a structure that defied imagination. It wasn't quite a castle and wasn't quite a temple, it was something altogether more otherworldly. Spiraling towers twisted toward the star-filled sky, their surfaces covered in the same silver script that had adorned her grandmother's scrolls. Bridges of what looked like crystallized moonlight connected different levels, and at the very top, a great hall glowed with soft light that seemed to come from within the stones themselves. This is Shadowmere, Kieran said softly. The last stronghold of the Moonhaven dynasty. Your ancestors built it as a place where the royal bloodline could retreat when the world grew too dangerous. It's incredible, Lyra breathed, unconsciously moving closer to him as they approached the main entrance. Massive doors carved with wolves and crescent moons swung open at their approach, as if recognizing her presence. The castle knows you, Kieran explained, noticing her surprise. Bloodline magic. It's been waiting for the rightful heir to return. They stepped into a great hall that took Lyra's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with constellations that seemed to move and shift in the corner of her eye. Tapestries depicting great battles and ceremonies lined the walls, and at the far end of the room sat a throne carved from what looked like a single massive moonstone. But it wasn't empty. A woman rose from the throne as they entered, tall and regal, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes the same shade of violet as storm clouds. She wore robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, and when she moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone who had never known a moment of self-doubt. Grandmother? Lyra whispered, but even as the word left her lips, she knew this wasn't Celeste. Great-great-great-grandmother, actually, the woman said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer and the authority of winter storms. Lady Evangeline Moonhaven, first queen of the Northern Territories. She smiled, and it was like watching the moon break through clouds. Though you may call me ancestor, I've been waiting in the between realm for your awakening, child. You're dead, Lyra said faintly. Death is a relative term for those of royal blood, Evangeline replied with amusement, especially when there are prophecies to fulfill and bloodlines to guide. Her violet eyes studied Lyra intently. You have her look, my daughter Celeste. The one who chose love over duty and started our long exile from power. Celeste was your daughter? 5 generations removed, but yes. And her choice to mate outside the approved bloodlines is what scattered our people and weakened the magic that kept our enemies at bay. Evangeline's expression softened, though I cannot say I blame her. Love makes fools of us all, regardless of royal blood. Kieran moved closer to Lyra, his presence solid and reassuring. My queen, the rival houses have found her location. The Shadowfang pack was among those who attacked the cottage. Evangeline's expression darkened. Marcus Shadowfang. I should have known he'd be the first to move. She turned back to Lyra. Child, you need to understand what you're facing. When our dynasty fell, it created a power vacuum that 6 other houses have been fighting to fill ever since. They've grown strong in our absence, and they see our awakening as a threat to everything they've built. But I don't know anything about being a princess or a queen or whatever I'm supposed to be, Lyra protested. I work at a library. I've never even been in a fight. The blood remembers, Evangeline said gently. And you won't be learning alone. Her gaze shifted to Kieran. The Blackthorne line has served mine faithfully for 7 centuries. Kieran's great-grandfather died protecting my daughter. His grandfather died protecting her daughter. His father gave his life to ensure your mother reached safety. And now it's my turn, Kieran said quietly. It's not just duty, princess. My family's magic is bound to yours. We literally cannot survive if the royal bloodline dies out. Lyra stared at him. What do you mean? The original blood oath, Evangeline explained. When my ancestor first claimed the throne, the Blackthorne pack pledged themselves as eternal guardians. Their life force became tied to ours. If you die without an heir, his bloodline dies with you. That's... Lyra felt sick. That's horrible. You can't choose your own life. I chose to honor my ancestors, Kieran replied firmly. And I'd choose it again. His golden eyes met hers. Besides, protecting you doesn't feel like a burden, princess. It feels like coming home. The pendant around Lyra's neck grew warm, and she caught a flash of something in his expression, something deeper than duty, more personal than oath-bound loyalty. The bond is already forming, Evangeline observed with interest. Fascinating. Usually that takes months of proximity to develop. What bond? Lyra demanded. The mate bond. The mystical connection that develops between a member of the royal bloodline and their destined partner. Evangeline's smile was knowing. It's not something that can be forced or faked. The magic itself chooses. Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks. I barely know him. You know him, Evangeline corrected gently. Your soul recognizes his. The question is whether you'll accept what the magic is offering or fight against your own nature. A howl echoed through the forest outside, distant, but distinctly threatening. They're regrouping, Kieran said grimly. The sanctuary will hold them for now, but we can't stay here indefinitely. No, Evangeline agreed. Lyra needs training. Real training. In the old ways. She moved to an alcove behind the throne and retrieved what looked like an ancient wooden chest. These were your great-great-grandmother's. The tools every heir must master. She opened the chest to reveal contents that made Lyra's mark pulse with recognition, a silver circlet set with moonstones, a dagger whose blade seemed to hold captured starlight, and a leather-bound tome that felt warm to the touch. The Crown of Whispers, it will let you communicate with any wolf in your territory, Evangeline explained. The blade of binding, forged from metal that fell from the moon itself, capable of cutting through any dark magic. And the Grimoire of Shadows, containing every spell, ritual, and secret your bloodline has accumulated over 1,000 years. I can't use any of this, Lyra protested. I don't know how to do magic. You will learn, Evangeline said with certainty. Kieran will teach you to fight. I will teach you to rule. And the magic will teach you to become what you were born to be. She placed the circlet on Lyra's head, and the world exploded into sensation. Suddenly, she could sense every living creature for miles around. The small forest animals hiding in their burrows, the ancient trees reaching toward the stars, and most overwhelming of all, the dozens of wolves surrounding the sanctuary's borders. Princess. The word whispered through her mind, and she realized with shock that it was coming from the wolves outside. We have waited so long. The blood of the moon has returned. They're not all enemies, she gasped, pulling the circlet from her head. No, Evangeline confirmed. Many of the smaller packs remained loyal. They've been waiting centuries for the royal line to return and restore order to our world. But the larger houses see you as a threat, Kieran added. They've grown accustomed to power, and they won't give it up without a fight. Evangeline moved to the great windows that looked out over the forest. Marcus Shadowfang will be the most dangerous. His house has claimed leadership of the Northern Territories in your absence. He's not just protecting his position, he's protecting his son's inheritance. His son, Darius Shadowfang, heir to the Shadowfang pack and the closest thing to a prince our people have had in 3 centuries. Evangeline's expression was troubled. He's powerful, charismatic, and completely ruthless. Marcus has been positioning him to claim the throne through conquest rather than birthright. And now that I'm here? Now you represent everything his family has worked toward for generations. Kieran's voice was grim. If you die, there's no one left to challenge their claim to rule. A new sound reached them from the forest, not howls this time, but the thunder of hooves. Many horses moving fast. What now? Lyra asked. Evangeline smiled, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she looked truly pleased. Reinforcements. It seems word of your awakening has spread faster than I expected. She moved toward the great doors. Come, child. It's time you met your subjects. They followed her outside, where a procession of riders was emerging from the silver mist that surrounded the sanctuary. But these weren't ordinary horses. They gleamed like polished metal in the moonlight, their eyes glowing with inner fire, and their hooves left trails of sparkling light on the stone. Celestial steeds, Kieran breathed. I thought they were extinct. Not extinct. Hidden, Evangeline corrected. Like so many things from the old world. The lead rider dismounted, pulling back the hood of their cloak to reveal a woman perhaps 30 years old, with the same violet eyes as Evangeline and hair that shifted color from black to silver in the moonlight. My queen, she said, bowing deeply to Evangeline before turning to Lyra. Princess. I am Lady Seraphina Nightwhisper, head of your loyal council. We've been scattered to the winds for 3 centuries, but the awakening of your mark has called us home. More riders dismounted, and Lyra realized she was looking at representatives from dozens of different packs, all smaller houses that had remained loyal to the Moonhaven line. We offer our swords, our magic, and our lives to the restoration of the dynasty, Seraphina continued. But we must act quickly. The rival houses are already forming alliances to destroy you before you can claim your full power. How long do we have? Kieran asked. Days, perhaps a week at most, Seraphina replied grimly. Marcus Shadowfang has called for a grand assembly, supposedly to welcome the princess home, but in reality to put you on trial for crimes against the established order. What crimes? Lyra demanded. Existing, Seraphina said bluntly. Your very presence destabilizes the power structure they've spent centuries building. Evangeline placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. This is why you must learn quickly, child. The old trials, the ancient rites of succession, they're not just ceremony. They're your only legal path to the throne. And if I fail them, then you die, Evangeline said simply. And with you, the hope of our people. The weight of responsibility settled on Lyra's shoulders like a physical thing. Around her, dozens of faces looked up with hope and expectation, people who had waited lifetimes for her return. When do we start? She asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Evangeline's smile was radiant.
Now, child.
Your education begins now. Chapter 3. Dawn broke over Shadowmere in shades of silver and gold, but Lyra had been awake for hours, poring over the Grimoire of Shadows by candlelight. The ancient text seemed to respond to her touch, revealing new pages and secrets with each turn. What she'd learned so far had left her reeling. The Moonhaven dynasty didn't just rule werewolves, she said aloud, looking up as Kieran entered the tower study where she'd spent the night. We were the bridge between all supernatural beings. Vampires, fae, witches, everyone answered to the celestial throne. Kieran set down a tray of food and moved to look over her shoulder at the grimoire. His proximity sent familiar warmth through her chest, and she caught his scent, pine and earth, and something uniquely him that made her pulse quicken. What happened to change that? He asked, seemingly unaffected by their closeness. Lyra turned the page to reveal an illustration that made her heart clench. It showed a great battle, supernatural beings of every kind locked in combat beneath a blood-red moon. The War of Broken Crowns. 300 years ago. I've heard stories, but the details were always kept from the lower houses. According to this, it started with a love story. Lyra traced the image with her finger. Princess Celeste Moonhaven, my ancestor, fell in love with a vampire lord named Adrian Blackwood. Their union would have united the two most powerful supernatural factions and brought unprecedented peace. But her younger sister, Princess Morwen, was already betrothed to Marcus Shadowfang's ancestor. She saw Celeste's choice as a betrayal of their family's alliance with the wolves. Lyra's voice grew heavy. Morwen poisoned Adrian on their wedding night, then convinced the other houses that Celeste had orchestrated his death to seize power over both species. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, and the war began. The supernatural world tore itself apart. Vampires retreated to their hidden enclaves. The Fae sealed their courts away from our realm entirely. Witches scattered to the winds. Lyra closed the grimoire gently, and the werewolf houses turned on each other, each claiming the right to rule in place of the traitorous royal line. What happened to Celeste? She fled with a handful of loyal guards, including your ancestor, apparently. She was pregnant with the heir that would eventually lead to me. Lyra's fingers found the pendant at her throat. But the damage was done. The unity that had taken centuries to build was destroyed in a matter of months. Footsteps on the tower stairs announced Evangeline's arrival. The ancestral queen materialized through the stone wall, her form more solid in the morning light. You've been reading about the war, she observed, noting Lyra's expression. Why didn't you stop it? You were queen then. You could have exposed Morwen's lies. Evangeline's smile was sad. I was already 3 years dead, child. Morwen chose her moment well. She waited until I was no longer there to protect Celeste. She moved to the window, gazing out at the forest. My daughters paid the price for my failure to see the darkness growing in Morwen's heart. And now the rival houses use that history to justify keeping power from the royal bloodline, Kieran said grimly. Indeed. They claim we're too dangerous to rule, that our emotions make us weak. Evangeline turned back to them. Which is why your trials will be so crucial, Lyra. You must prove not just your power, but your worthiness to heal the wounds of the past. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. Lyra looked down to see Lady Seraphina approaching the castle with a grim expression and a stranger at her side, a man whose very presence seemed to drain color from the world around him. Vampire. Kieran growled, his body tensing for a fight. Peace, Evangeline said sharply. That's Lord Victor Blackwood, Adrian's descendant. Her violet eyes were bright with interest. It seems word of your awakening has reached farther than we thought. They hurried downstairs to meet the unexpected visitors. Lord Blackwood was tall and pale, with silver hair and eyes like winter frost. When he bowed to Lyra, it was with the fluid grace of a bygone era. Princess, he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. I bring greetings from the Blackwood clan, and an offer of alliance that your enemies will not expect. The vampires want to ally with us? Lyra asked, surprised. Some of us never forgot that your ancestor died trying to bridge our peoples, Victor replied. And some of us believe it's time to finish what she started. Seraphina stepped forward. My lady, there's more. The Shadowfang pack isn't just gathering werewolf allies. They've made contact with rogue fae and vampire lords who profit from the current chaos. They're building a coalition to destroy you before you can unite the supernatural world again. Then we need our own coalition, Lyra said, the words coming from some deep instinct she didn't fully understand. The loyal houses, the vampires who remember the old alliances. She looked at Victor. What would your people want in return for their support? Recognition. A seat at the table when the new order is established. And most importantly, Victor's frost-colored eyes met hers directly. Justice for Adrian Blackwood's murder. Morwen died centuries ago, Kieran pointed out. But her bloodline lives on in the Shadowfang pack, Victor replied coldly. Marcus Shadowfang is Morwen's great-great-grandson. The poison that killed my ancestor flows in his veins. Evangeline had been listening with growing intensity. Victor speaks truth. I never told Celeste, but I suspected Morwen's betrayal went deeper than jealousy. She had already been meeting secretly with werewolf extremists who wanted to break the supernatural alliance. You're saying this was planned? Lyra felt pieces of a centuries-old puzzle clicking into place. I believe Morwen orchestrated the entire war to put her descendants on the throne, Evangeline said grimly. The evidence is in the grimoire, if you know what to look for. Lyra opened the ancient book again, and this time new pages revealed themselves, pages written in a different hand, with a different kind of ink that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dark magic, Victor hissed, stepping back. That script was written in vampire blood. The text was difficult to read, but as Lyra focused, the words became clear. The Moon Princess grows too powerful. Her alliance with the Bloodsucker threatens everything we've worked toward. If she will not see reason, then she must be removed before the binding ceremony. The sleeping draught in the wine will ensure he cannot protect her when the poison takes hold. By dawn, both will be dead, and the crown will pass to its rightful heir. Mother of wolves, Kieran breathed. She documented her own treason. Morwen always was too proud of her own cleverness, Evangeline said bitterly. She couldn't resist recording her triumph. This changes everything, Seraphina said. With proof of the Shadowfang deception, we can expose 3 centuries of lies and reclaim not just the werewolf throne, but leadership of the entire supernatural world, Lyra finished, understanding flooding through her. Victor smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuinely warm. Princess, you begin to see the scope of what we're offering. Not just an alliance, but restoration of the old order, with yourself as High Queen of all supernatural beings. The weight of such responsibility should have terrified her, but instead, Lyra felt something stirring in her blood, a recognition of purpose, of destiny calling to be claimed. What would I need to do? First, survive the trials the rival houses will demand, Evangeline said. Prove your worthiness to rule according to the old laws. Then we take back what was stolen, Victor said softly. And make the Shadowfang pack answer for centuries of blood spilled in their name. A new howl echoed through the forest, but this one was different. Musical, haunting, filled with power that made the very air shimmer. What was that? Lyra asked. Evangeline's eyes widened. Fey magic. Someone is calling for parley under the old protocols. They rushed to the great windows, where a sight awaited them that took Lyra's breath away. Standing at the edge of the silver mist that protected Shadowmere was a figure that seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, tall, ethereally beautiful, with wings that shifted between transparent and opalescent. Lord Aurelius of the Winter Court, Victor said with surprise. I haven't seen him in 2 centuries. The Fae have been sealed away since the war, Seraphina added. If he's here, then they're ready to choose sides, Evangeline finished. The question is which side they'll choose. Aurelius raised his hand, and his voice carried on the wind with supernatural clarity. Princess Lyra of the Moonhaven line, I bring word from the high courts. We offer you the chance to prove yourself worthy of ancient alliances. But know that others have made their own overtures to us. You are not the only one seeking Fae support. Darius, Kieran growled. He's already trying to turn them against us. Then we meet with Lord Aurelius, Lyra said firmly. And we make our case. Child, Evangeline warned, dealing with the Fae is dangerous even for experienced rulers. They trade in obligations and debts that can bind you for lifetimes. Then it's good thing I have advisors, Lyra replied, looking at each of them in turn. We're stronger together than any of us could be alone. That's what Celeste understood, and it's what we need to remember now. She moved toward the castle entrance, then paused. Kieran, will you come with me? I have a feeling I'm going to need my guardian for this. The warmth in his golden eyes made her heart skip. Always, princess. Chapter 4. The meeting with Lord Aurelius took place in a grove where reality seemed negotiable. Ancient oaks twisted into impossible spirals, their leaves shifting through every color of the rainbow. Flowers bloomed and withered in moments, only to bloom again in different hues. Even the ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if they walked on dreams made solid. Aurelius himself was a study in otherworldly beauty and barely contained power. His hair changed from silver to gold to deep midnight blue as he moved, and his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in Lyra's bones. Princess of the Fallen Moon, he began, inclining his head in what might have been respect or mockery. You seek the aid of the Fey courts in reclaiming your birthright. I seek to heal the wounds that have festered for 3 centuries, Lyra replied carefully, remembering Evangeline's warnings about Fey word games. To restore the alliance that once brought peace to all our peoples. Pretty words. But the young Shadowfawn prince offered us something more tangible. Aurelius smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible. He promises us territory in the mortal realm, hunting rights we've been denied since the Great Sundering. What do you offer that could compare? Beside her, Kieran tensed, but Lyra felt an odd calm descend over her. The pendant at her throat grew warm, and suddenly she could sense the undercurrents beneath Aurelius's words, the longing, the centuries of isolation, the desperate hunger for connection with the world they'd been forced to abandon. I offer you what Darius never could, she said softly. I offer you home. Something flickered in those galaxy-deep eyes. Explain. The Fey courts weren't meant to be sealed away from our realm. You're connected to this world, part of its magic and mystery. That's why you're fading, isn't it? Why your courts grow smaller each year, your magic weaker. Aurelius's perfect composure cracked slightly. You know nothing of. I know what it's like to be cut off from who you're supposed to be, Lyra interrupted gently. To feel like part of yourself is missing, sleeping, waiting to be awakened. She touched her birthmark. The old alliance didn't just give you hunting rights or territory. It gave you connection to the source of all supernatural power, the bloodline that bridges mortal and magical worlds. Victor stepped forward slightly. She speaks truth, Lord Aurelius. The vampires have felt it too, the slow weakening that comes from separation from the royal line. You're dying without us, Lyra continued, understanding flooding through her as the grimoire's knowledge awakened in her mind. All of you. Vampires growing weaker, Fey courts diminishing, werewolf packs scattered and feuding. The supernatural world needs unity to survive, not more division. Aurelius was quiet for a long moment, his beautiful face cycling through expressions too complex for mortal understanding. Finally, he spoke. Even if what you say is true, you are untested, untrained. What proof do we have that you could succeed where your ancestors failed? Let me undergo the trial of starlight, Lyra said, the words coming from some deep instinct she didn't question. Everyone stared at her. Even Aurelius looked surprised. Child, Evangeline's voice whispered in her mind. Apparently the ancestral queen could project herself into the Fey realm. The trial of starlight hasn't been attempted in 5 centuries. It could kill you. What is this trial? Kieran demanded, his protective instincts clearly screaming. Aurelius studied Lyra with new interest. A test of worthiness created by the first Fey-Werewolf alliance. The candidate must navigate the realm between dreams and reality, face projections of their deepest fears and desires, and emerge with their sense of self intact. His smile was sharp. Most who attempt it are driven mad within minutes. And if I succeed? Then the Winter Court will acknowledge you as the true heir to the celestial throne, and our alliance will be renewed. His expression grew more serious. But if you fail, your mind will be lost to the shadow realm forever, and your cause dies with you. Lyra, no, Kieran said firmly. It's too dangerous. Everything we're doing is dangerous, she replied, surprised by her own certainty. But this feels right. Like something I meant to do. She looked at each of her companions. Victor with his frost-pale eyes full of ancient pain, Seraphina whose loyalty had endured centuries of exile, and Kieran whose golden gaze held depths of feeling he'd never spoken aloud. "If I don't come back," she began. "You will," Kieran interrupted fiercely, "because I'll be anchoring you to this realm." The guardian bond, Aurelius mused. Interesting. That might actually give you a chance of survival. He gestured and the air shimmered. Very well. Let the trial begin. The world dissolved. Lyra found herself standing in a vast library that stretched beyond sight in all directions. Books floated through the air like lazy birds, and ladders that led to nowhere stretched toward a ceiling made of swirling galaxies. It was beautiful and impossible and completely familiar. "This is what you really want," a voice whispered. "Not crowns or thrones or dangerous alliances. Just books and quiet and a simple life where nobody expects you to save the world." The temptation was overwhelming. She could see herself here, reading for eternity, never having to make another difficult decision or risk another life on her choices. But then she heard it, Kieran's voice, distant but real. "Princess, stay with me. Remember who you are." The library wavered and changed. Now she stood in her grandmother's cottage, but it was burning. Celeste lay motionless on the floor, and standing over her was Darius Shadowfang, tall, dark, devastatingly handsome, and smiling with cold satisfaction. "This is what happens when you play at being queen," he said. "Everyone you love pays the price for your arrogance." "No," Lyra said firmly. "I won't let fear control me." Darius laughed. "You already have. You're hiding in a magical castle while your enemies gather strength. You're a coward playing dress-up in your ancestors' clothes." The words hit like physical blows, but Lyra forced herself to stand straight. "I'm learning, growing stronger. And when I'm ready, you'll never be ready." Darius's form grew larger, more monstrous. "You're weak, pathetic, a pale shadow of the queens who came before you. Your bloodline should have died out centuries ago." "Maybe," Lyra said quietly. "But it didn't. And maybe that's because the world needs something different now. Not a queen who rules through fear and power, but one who understands what it means to be lost and scared and still choose to do what's right." The monstrous version of Darius lunged at her, but Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she held out her hand, and the blade of binding materialized in her grip. The starlight metal sang as it cut through the illusion, dispersing the nightmare like smoke. The scene changed again. Now she stood in a great throne room filled with representatives of every supernatural species: werewolves, vampires, fae, witches, and beings she didn't recognize. They all looked at her with expectation and hope, and the weight of their faith was almost crushing. "You could disappoint them all," whispered a voice that sounded like her own doubts. "You could make the wrong choice and plunge the supernatural world into another war. Maybe it's better to let someone else lead, someone more qualified." "There is no one else," Lyra said aloud. "That's the point. I didn't choose this destiny, but it chose me. And running from it won't make it go away." She walked forward, past the watching faces, toward a throne that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise I'll never stop trying to do better, to be better for all of us." As she sat on the throne, the watching faces smiled, and their approval washed over her like sunlight. "One final test," the realm whispered. The throne room faded, and she found herself back in the forest glade, but Kieran was gone. In his place stood a figure she recognized from the grimoire, Princess Celeste, her ancestor, looking exactly as she had on the night she'd fled the palace. "You think you can succeed where I failed?" Celeste asked, but her voice was kind, not challenging. "I think I can learn from your mistakes," Lyra replied honestly. "And maybe have advantages you didn't." "Such as?" "I know the truth about what happened. I know Morwen's betrayal wasn't your fault." Lyra stepped closer. "And I'm not facing this alone. I have allies you never had a chance to gather." Celeste smiled. "And what of love? I chose love over duty, and it destroyed our world." Will you make the same choice? Lyra thought of Kieran, his strength, his loyalty, the way her heart raced when he looked at her with those golden eyes. I don't think it has to be a choice. Maybe the mistake was believing love and duty couldn't coexist. Perhaps, Celeste said softly. Perhaps that's the lesson my sacrifice was meant to teach. She began to fade. Rule well, daughter. Rule with both wisdom and heart. The trial realm dissolved, and Lyra found herself back in the Fey Grove, gasping as if she'd been underwater. Kieran was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes wild with worry. Princess, are you? I'm fine, she managed, leaning into his warmth. I'm better than fine. Aurelius was staring at her with something like awe. Remarkable. You not only survived the trial, you conquered it. I haven't seen such mastery of the Shadow Realm since. He paused. Since the first queen, Evangeline herself. Does this mean? It means the Winter Court acknowledges your claim, Aurelius said formally. And we offer our alliance in the trials to come. His expression grew serious. But know this, young queen, the real tests are only beginning. The Shadowfang Pack will not accept your legitimacy without a fight. Then it's good thing I won't be facing them alone, Lyra replied, looking at the faces of her allies, vampire, fae, and the werewolf whose bond to her grew stronger with every breath. The war for her birthright was coming, but for the first time since this all began, Lyra felt ready to meet it. Chapter 5. 3 days after the trial of Starlight, Shadowmere buzzed with activity as allies from across the supernatural world arrived to pledge their support. Lyra stood on the highest tower's balcony, watching delegations set up camps in the enchanted forest below. Vampire tents that seemed to absorb light. Fae pavilions that shifted between seasons with each breath of wind. Werewolf packs that had remained loyal for centuries, finally able to emerge from hiding. Regrets. Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She didn't turn around, but she could feel his presence like sunlight against her back. About which part? Accepting a destiny I never wanted, forming alliances that could reshape the supernatural world, or falling for my guardian. The silence stretched long enough that she finally did turn to find him staring at her with an expression of stunned vulnerability. You're falling for me? His voice was carefully neutral, but his golden eyes burned with hope. Heat flooded her cheeks. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. That is. Because I fell for you the moment you turned around in your grandmother's cottage and looked at me like I might actually be the answer to something you'd been searching for your whole life. The confession hit her like a physical blow. Kieran. I know it complicates everything, he continued, stepping closer. I know my family's bound to yours by oaths older than memory, and you might never be sure if what I feel is real or just magical compulsion. Stop. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against her palms. What I feel when I look at you has nothing to do with oaths or bloodlines or destiny. It's just you. The way you make me feel safe and challenged at the same time. The way you believe in me even when I don't believe in myself. His hands covered hers. Lyra. Your Majesty. Lady Seraphina's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Forgive the interruption, but we have a situation. Lyra stepped back from Kieran, trying to ignore the loss of his warmth. What kind of situation? A messenger from the Shadowfang Pack. He's requesting immediate audience under the old protocols. Demanding, more likely, Kieran muttered, but he was already shifting into guardian mode, his relaxed posture replaced by predatory alertness. They found the messenger waiting in Shadowmere's Great Hall, a young werewolf with the distinctive silver-streaked hair of the Shadowfang bloodline. He wore ceremonial armor that looked like it had been forged centuries ago, and when he bowed, it was with precise formality that managed to convey mockery rather than respect. Princess Lyra of the Fallen Moonhaven line, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I bear greetings from Marcus Shadowfang, rightful alpha of the Northern Territories, and his son, Prince Darius, heir to the true throne. I wasn't aware the Shadowfang Pack had established a monarchy, Lyra replied coolly. The last I heard, leadership of the territories was meant to be temporary until the royal bloodline returned. The messenger's smile was sharp. Times change, princess. The weak are replaced by the strong, and pretty bloodlines mean nothing without the power to enforce them. Kieran growled low in his throat, but Lyra held up a hand for silence. I assume you have a message to deliver? Indeed. Lord Marcus extends an invitation to the Grand Assembly to be held in 7 days at the Howling Grounds, neutral territory where all grievances can be aired and all claims evaluated. The messenger's eyes glittered with malice. Of course, attendance is voluntary, though refusal would be seen as an admission of false claiming. And what format will this evaluation take? Victor asked from where he stood with the other alliance leaders. The ancient trials, naturally. Tests of strength, wisdom, and worthiness as outlined in the old laws. The messenger's gaze fixed on Lyra. Though I confess, Lord Marcus wonders if a princess who spent her whole life in the human world will be prepared for such rigorous examination. Tell Lord Marcus that I accept his invitation, Lyra said firmly. And tell him that I look forward to discussing the evidence I've recently discovered regarding the War of Broken Crowns. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the messenger's face. Evidence. Oh yes. Fascinating historical documents that shed new light on exactly how that war began. I'm sure all the assembled houses will be eager to hear about Princess Morwen's true role in the tragedy. The messenger's composure cracked entirely. I don't know what lies you think you've uncovered. I don't think I've uncovered anything, Lyra interrupted smoothly. I know exactly what I've found. The question is whether your masters are prepared to face the truth they've been hiding for 3 centuries. The messenger left without another word, and silence settled over the great hall. That went well, Seraphina said dryly. You've declared war, Victor observed. He'll report back that you have proof of their deception. They'll be prepared for you now. Good, Lyra replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. I'm tired of hiding. Tired of being reactive. It's time to take the offensive. Evangeline materialized beside the throne, her spiritual form more solid than usual. Child, there's something else you need to know about the trials. Something I didn't tell you before, because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. What kind of something? Kieran asked suspiciously. The Grand Assembly isn't just about proving worthiness to rule. It's about fulfilling the prophecy that will determine the future of all supernatural kind. Evangeline's violet eyes were grave. The true prophecy, not the fragment you read in your grandmother's cottage. She gestured, and words appeared in the air, glowing with silver fire. When the last daughter of Moon's bright line awakens to her destined power, she shall face the shadow of betrayal's seed in the trial's darkest hour. 2 paths diverge beneath the bleeding moon, love's light or vengeance's call, and in her choosing lies the fate of all, salvation or the final fall. If she claims the throne through wisdom's grace and love's unbroken chain, the scattered children of the night shall be united once again. But should she choose the darker path, let by rage and ancient pain, the supernatural world shall burn and none shall rise again. The bleeding moon, Aurelius said softly. The lunar eclipse that occurs only once every 3 centuries. It's in 6 days. The same night as the Grand Assembly, Seraphina added grimly. They planned this deliberately. What does it mean exactly? Lyra asked, though part of her already knew. The blood in her veins seemed to recognize the ancient words. It means your choices during the trials will determine not just who rules, but whether our world survives, Evangeline explained. The prophecy speaks of 2 paths, love and vengeance. Choose love, and you can heal the rifts that have divided us for centuries. Choose vengeance. And everything burns, Lyra finished. But what does that mean practically? How do I choose? That depends on what the trials reveal, Victor said thoughtfully. Prophecies are tricky things. They're fulfilled in ways we rarely expect. A new voice cut through their discussion. Perhaps I can provide some clarity. Everyone spun toward the entrance, where a figure stood that made Lyra's breath catch. He was tall and devastatingly handsome, with dark hair and silver eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. He wore clothes that somehow managed to look both ancient and timelessly elegant, and when he moved, it was with the fluid confidence of someone who had never doubted his own power. Prince Darius Shadowfong, Kieran snarled, his hand moving to the sword at his side. Guardian Blackthorne, Darius replied with a mocking smile. Still playing bodyguard to lost causes, I see. How did you get past our defenses? Seraphina demanded. The same way she did. Darius's silver gaze fixed on Lyra. Royal blood has certain privileges, even in enemy territory. Royal blood. Lyra's mark burned against her throat. You're not. Oh, but I am. Princess Morwen's bloodline didn't end with her death. She had a son, my ancestor, raised in secret and taught the truth about his mother's sacrifice to save our people from your family's dangerous idealism. Darius stepped further into the hall, seemingly unbothered by being surrounded by hostile supernatural beings. Which makes me as much a royal heir as you are, dear cousin. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Cousin. Surprised? You shouldn't be. Royal bloodlines intermarry for centuries. It's inevitable that we'd share ancestry. His smile was predatory. Though I must say, the family resemblance is stronger than I expected. You have Morwen's eyes. Morwen was a traitor and a murderer, Victor spat. Morwen was a patriot who saw that your precious alliance would have destroyed everything that made Werewolf strong, Darius replied without heat. She saved our people from becoming lapdogs to vampires and servants to fey whims. She started a war that scattered and weakened every supernatural species, Lyra shot back. She prevented a future that would have been far worse. Darius moved closer, and Lyra could feel power radiating from him, not just the strength of an alpha werewolf, but something deeper. Something that resonated with her own awakening abilities. But I didn't come here to debate history, cousin. I came to make you an offer. I'm not interested in anything you have to say. Not even if it could prevent the prophecy's darker outcome? His silver eyes glittered. You've read the words, princess. 2 paths, 2 choices. What if I told you there was a third option? Despite herself, Lyra found her attention caught. What kind of third option? Alliance. Between the 2 royal bloodlines. A marriage that would unite our houses and heal the ancient rift without requiring you to abandon your principles or me to abandon mine. Darius's smile was dazzling. Think about it. The supernatural world has been waiting 3 centuries for stability. We could give them that. A marriage alliance, Kieran repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Of course, you have to give up your guardian, Darius continued, as if Kieran hadn't spoken. But surely that's a small price to pay for preventing another war. The suggestion hung in the air like poison. Lyra could feel everyone waiting for her response, could sense the political calculations running through their minds. It would solve so many problems, unite the rival factions, prevent bloodshed, and it would destroy her. No, she said firmly. Darius raised an eyebrow. No. No alliance. No marriage. No compromise with murderers and liars. Lyra's voice grew stronger with each word. You want to know which path I'll choose at the trials? I choose the path where the truth matters. Where justice isn't sacrificed for convenience. Where love isn't treated as weakness. Even if it means war? Even if it means war. She met his silver gaze directly. Some things are worth fighting for. Darius studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I had hoped you might be reasonable. It would have made things so much simpler. His expression hardened. But if you insist on the difficult path, then so be it. I'll see you at the trials, cousin. May the best royal win. He turned and walked out as casually as he'd entered, leaving behind a silence thick with tension and unspoken fears. Well, Aurelius said finally. That was illuminating. He's more dangerous than I expected, Victor added grimly. That wasn't just werewolf power I sensed from him. He's been enhanced somehow. Dark magic, Evangeline confirmed, her spiritual form flickering with agitation. The same kind Morwen used. It's been passed down through their bloodline, growing stronger with each generation. Lyra sank into the throne, suddenly feeling the weight of everything ahead. 7 days until the trials. 6 days until the eclipse. And now we know I'll be facing an opponent who has both royal blood and centuries of dark magic backing him. You'll be facing him with allies who would die before letting you fail, Kieran said fiercely. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Lyra replied, looking at each of their faces. Vampire, fae, werewolf, and spirit, all united in their determination to see justice done. The prophecy talks about love's unbroken chain. I think that's what it means, not just romantic love, but all the bonds that tie us together. Family, loyalty, friendship, shared purpose. Then that's our strength, Seraphina said. While Darius relies on fear and dark magic, we fight with connections freely given. The question is whether it will be enough, Evangeline murmured. Lyra stood from the throne, her hand instinctively finding Kieran's. I guess we're about to find out. Chapter 6. The Howling Grounds were older than memory, a vast amphitheater carved from living stone and surrounded by ancient standing stones that hummed with dormant power. As Lyra and her entourage arrived under the light of the rising moon, she could see that representatives from every major supernatural faction had gathered, hundreds of werewolves, vampires, fae, and other beings she couldn't immediately identify. Impressive turnout, Victor observed, his frost-pale eyes scanning the crowd. I haven't seen this many of our kind in one place since before the war. They're here to witness history, Aurelius added, his face senses picking up currents of emotion from the assembled masses. Hope and fear in equal measure. Lyra wore the ceremonial robes Evangeline had guided her to, silver fabric that seemed to hold captured moonlight, with the Moonhaven crest embroidered in threads that shifted between blue and violet. The crown of whispers rested on her brow, and the blade of binding hung at her side. She looked every inch the princess she was meant to be, but inside, her stomach churned with nervous energy. Remember, Kieran murmured as they approached the arena floor, you're not facing this alone. Every person here who believes in justice is fighting with you. The Shadowfang delegation was already present, occupying the place of honor traditionally reserved for the ruling house. Marcus Shadowfang sat on a throne-like chair that looked suspiciously similar to the one that had once graced the Moonhaven Palace. He was a man at his prime, silver-haired and powerfully built, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. But it was his son who drew every eye. Darius had abandoned his elegant modern clothing for traditional ceremonial armor, black metal inscribed with silver runes that seemed to move in the torchlight. He looked magnificent and terrible, every inch the warrior prince he'd been raised to be. When his silver eyes met Lyra's across the arena, his smile was both beautiful and predatory. Lords and ladies of the supernatural realm, Marcus Shadowfang's voice boomed across the amphitheater. We gather under the ancient laws to witness the resolution of competing claims to leadership. Let it be known that House Shadowfang does not seek this confrontation, but accepts it in service to the stability our people deserve. House Moonhaven thanks House Shadowfang for their gracious hosting, Lyra replied, her voice carrying clearly thanks to the arena's acoustics. Though we question whether those who rule through deception can truly provide the stability our people need. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't going to be a polite, ceremonial proceeding. Strong words from someone who's been hiding in the human world while we've borne the burden of leadership, Darius called out. But words are easy. Let's see if your actions match your rhetoric. An ancient werewolf stepped forward, Elder Thorn, keeper of the old laws and supposedly neutral in pack politics. His voice cracked with age but carried absolute authority. By the laws written in the first days, when competing claims arise for leadership of the supernatural realm, they shall be settled by the 3 trials. First, the trial of strength to prove the body's worthiness. Second, the trial of wisdom to prove the mind's fitness. Third, the trial of spirit to prove the soul's purity. His rheumy eyes fixed on both claimants. Do you both accept these terms? I accept, Lyra said clearly. I accept, Darius replied. Then let the first trial begin. The trial of strength wasn't what Lyra had expected. Instead of a simple combat between her and Darius, Elder Thorn gestured to a series of obstacles that had been prepared in the arena center. Massive stones that would need to be moved. Barriers to be overcome. And at the end, a test of pure endurance, holding a silver sphere that grew heavier with each passing second. The trial tests not just raw power, Elder Thorn explained, but the strength to endure, to overcome obstacles, to bear the weight of leadership. Darius went first, and Lyra had to admit he was impressive. His enhanced werewolf strength allowed him to lift stones that should have been impossible for any single person to move. He navigated the obstacles with fluid grace, his movements speaking to years of training and discipline. When he reached the silver sphere, he held it for nearly 10 minutes before the weight finally forced him to set it down. The crowd murmured appreciation. It was a performance that would be hard to match. "Princess Lyra," Elder Thorne called. Lyra approached the first obstacle, a massive stone block carved with ancient runes. As she placed her hands on it, the crown of whispers began to hum, and suddenly, she could sense something Darius had missed. The stones weren't just tests of strength, they were connected to the old magic, responding to the intent and worthiness of the one who touched them. Instead of trying to match Darius's raw power, Lyra reached out with her newly awakened magical senses. The stone recognized her touch, acknowledged her bloodline, and seemed to lift itself at her guidance rather than through her physical force. The obstacles were the same when she approached them with respect rather than aggression, with understanding rather than domination. They yielded to her in ways they hadn't for Darius. But the real test came with the silver sphere. The moment her fingers closed around it, Lyra understood why it grew heavier. It was absorbing the fears and doubts of the one who held it, becoming weighed down with their uncertainties about their fitness to lead. Darius had fought against that weight, trying to overcome it through sheer will. But as Lyra held the sphere, she instead embraced her doubts, acknowledged them, and chose to carry them as part of the responsibility she was accepting. The sphere grew heavy, heavier than anything she'd ever imagined, but she didn't fight it. She accepted it as part of what it meant to truly lead. 15 minutes passed.
20.
The crowd grew restless, then amazed, then silent with awe as Lyra continued to hold the sphere that represented the full weight of leadership. Finally, Elder Thorne called time. The first trial is complete. In strength of arm, Prince Darius excelled. In strength of spirit, Princess Lyra proved superior. Darius's expression was unreadable as they moved to the second trial. The trial of wisdom took place in a circle of standing stones that hummed with ancient power. Elder Thorne presented them with a scenario. A village of mixed supernatural inhabitants was being threatened by human hunters. Some villagers wanted to fight back with lethal force. Others wanted to flee and abandon their homes. Others wanted to try negotiation. Each choice had consequences, and they had minutes to decide. Darius spoke first. The threat must be eliminated completely. Show the humans that we're not to be trifled with, and they'll leave us alone. Negotiate from a position of strength after demonstrating the cost of threatening us. It was a logical answer, and several pack leaders nodded approval. When Lyra's turn came, she was quiet for a long moment, thinking not just about the scenario, but about the deeper principles at stake. The real problem isn't this specific threat, she said finally. It's the fact that humans and supernatural beings have been living in ignorance and fear of each other for centuries. Eliminating this particular group of hunters might solve the immediate problem, but it reinforces the cycle of mistrust that created the problem in the first place. Ket's skeptical about whether such idealism could work in practice. The princess offers a gentle solution, Darius said smoothly. But what happens when gentleness meets true evil? When the humans decide they want to exterminate us entirely, will Princess Lyra still counsel understanding? It was a pointed challenge, and Lyra felt the weight of every gaze in the amphitheater. I would hope it never comes to that, she replied. But if it did, if faced with genocide, I would fight with everything I had to protect our people. The difference is, I would fight to preserve life, not to prove dominance. I would fight as a last resort, not a first choice. Pretty words, Darius said. But in the moment of crisis, when lives hang in the balance, can you be certain your conscience won't hesitate when action is needed? Can you be certain your aggression won't create the very crisis you claim to be preventing? Lyra shot back. Elder Thorne raised his hand for silence. The second trial is complete. Both claimants have shown wisdom, though of different kinds. The final trial will determine which approach serves our people better. The trial of spirit was the most mysterious. All they were told was that they would face the truth of themselves and their motivations. Lyra and Darius were led to separate chambers beneath the arena where they would undergo whatever test the ancient magic deemed appropriate. Lyra's chamber was simple, a circular room carved from white stone, with only a small pool of perfectly still water in the center. As she approached it, her reflection wavered and changed, showing her not as she was, but as she could become. First, she saw herself crowned and triumphant, ruling over a unified supernatural world where all species lived in harmony. It was everything she hoped to achieve, and the temptation to embrace that vision was almost overwhelming. But then the image shifted, showing her the price of that success. Compromises that eroded her principles. Decisions made from political necessity rather than moral conviction. The slow corruption that came with power until she was everything she'd once opposed. "This is what victory looks like," a voice whispered. "Are you prepared to pay the cost?" "Not that cost," Lyra said firmly. "If winning means becoming my enemy, then I choose to lose with my integrity intact." The image changed again. Now she saw herself defeated, but surrounded by people who loved and respected her. Her cause lost, but her principles uncompromised. It was peaceful, but it also meant that the injustices she'd hoped to fight would continue unchallenged. And this is what defeat looks like. Will you let evil triumph to keep your hands clean? No, Lyra said after a long moment. But there has to be another way. A path between corruption and surrender. The water in the pool began to glow, and a new image formed, one that took her breath away. She saw herself older, wearing a crown but still recognizably herself. The supernatural world around her wasn't perfect, but it was improving. There were still conflicts, still challenges, but they were being met with wisdom and compassion rather than fear and aggression. The hardest path, the voice said softly, to change the world without losing yourself, to hold power without being corrupted by it, to fight when necessary without becoming warlike. Can you walk this path? I can try, Lyra said. And if I fail, I can keep trying. That's all anyone can do. The pool's glow faded, and she knew the trial was complete. When she emerged from the chamber, Darius was already waiting in the main arena. His face was pale, his silver eyes haunted by whatever he'd experienced in his own trial. Elder Thorn stood between them. The trials are complete. The ancient magic has tested both claimants and found. He paused, his expression troubled. It has found both worthy in different ways. Princess Lyra embodies the hope for a better future. Prince Darius embodies the strength to face harsh realities. Both have passed the trials. A murmur of confusion ran through the crowd. What does that mean? Marcus Shadowfang demanded. It means, Elder Thorn said slowly, that the magic itself cannot choose between them. The decision must be made by acclamation of the assembled houses. Lyra's heart sank. This would come down to politics after all, which houses backed which claimant. But then something unexpected happened. From the crowd came a voice. I call for the reading of the evidence. It was Victor, and his vampire's voice carried clearly through the amphitheater. Princess Lyra claims to have proof of deception in the War of Broken Crowns. Let that evidence be heard before any votes are cast. The crowd roared approval. Ancient law gave any assembly member the right to call for evidence before a decision. Elder Thorn looked troubled but nodded. Very well. Present your evidence, Princess. Lyra stepped forward, pulling the grimoire from her robes. As she opened it to the relevant page, the dark magic text glowed with malevolent light, visible to every person in the amphitheater. 300 years ago, Princess Morwen Moonhaven wrote these words in the blood of the vampire she murdered. Lyra's voice rang out clear and strong. She documented her own treason, her planned assassination of her sister's mate, and her deliberate instigation of the war that scattered our people. She read Morwen's confession aloud, word by word. As the truth rang out across the ancient stones, a change came over the crowd. Shock gave way to anger, anger to outrage. This is forgery. Marcus Shadowfang roared, but his voice lacked conviction. Dark magic cannot lie, Elder Thorn said grimly. These words are true. The War of Broken Crowns was begun by treachery, not Moonhaven weakness. The crowd was in uproar now, but Darius stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise with supernatural power. Even if this is true, he called out, it changes nothing. The war still happened. Our people were still scattered and weakened. Whatever my ancestors' crimes, they don't erase 3 centuries of Shadowfang leadership. Leadership built on lies, Lyra replied. Leadership that has kept our people divided and weak while the human world grew stronger around us. How many supernatural beings have we lost to human ignorance because we were too busy fighting each other to work together? And what do you offer instead? Darius demanded. Pretty speeches about unity? Idealistic dreams about cooperation? You've been in this world for less than 2 weeks. I offer truth, Lyra said simply. I offer justice. And I offer hope that we can be better than our worst moments. The crowd fell silent, and in that silence, the eclipse began. The moon overhead started to darken as shadow crept across its face, and the very air hummed with prophecy. This was the moment. The choice that would determine everything. Houses of the supernatural realm. Elder Thorn called out. Cast your votes. Who will lead us into the future? Chapter 7. The eclipse hung overhead like a blood-red eye as the houses cast their votes, each declaration echoing across the ancient amphitheater like thunder. Lyra stood motionless in the center of the arena, her heart hammering as centuries of alliance and enmity played out in real time. House Night Whisper votes for Princess Lyra Moonhaven. Seraphina's voice rang out clear and strong. House Blackwood pledges to the Moonhaven restoration. Victor called, his vampire contingent raising their hands in unified support. The Winter Court acknowledges Princess Lyra as rightful heir. Aurelius declared, his fey magic making his words shimmer in the air. But the Shadowfang allies weren't silent. House Ironjaw votes for Prince Darius Shadowfang, roared a massive werewolf whose scars told stories of countless battles. House Bloodmoon stands with strength, not sentiment, added another alpha, her pack howling agreement. The votes continued, each one shifting the balance. Lyra found herself keeping a mental tally, her stomach churning as she realized how evenly divided the supernatural world truly was. 3 centuries of Shadowfang rule had created deep loyalties, while her family's exile had left only fragments of the old allegiances intact. House Stormwind abstains, called an elderly werewolf matriarch. We require more time to consider the implications. House Ravencrest also abstains. House Thornfield abstains. Lyra's heart sank. The abstentions were almost worse than outright opposition. They spoke to uncertainty, to a supernatural world so fractured that even the revelation of ancient treachery couldn't unite them. Elder Thorn tallied the final count with grim efficiency. 43 houses for Princess Lyra. 41 houses for Prince Darius. 22 abstentions. He looked up, his ancient eyes reflecting the blood moon's light. No clear majority has been achieved. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Marcus Shadowfang stepped forward, his expression triumphant despite the near tie. According to ancient law, he declared, when no clear majority emerges, leadership defaults to the current ruling house until such time as a definitive choice can be made. That's convenient, Victor said dryly, loud enough for his words to carry. That's the law, Marcus replied sharply. Written in the old codes to prevent chaos during times of uncertainty. But Elder Thorn was shaking his head. I'm afraid the situation is more complex than that, Lord Marcus. He gestured to the grimoire still glowing in Lyra's hands. The evidence of Princess Morwen's treachery invalidates any claim to legitimate succession by House Shadowfang. Your family's rule was built on deception legally, was never valid at all. You can't overturn 3 centuries of established authority based on truth. Lyra interrupted, stepping forward. The crown of whispers on her brow pulsed with power, and her voice carried to every corner of the amphitheater. The supernatural world has been limping along for 300 years, divided and weakened, because we've been living a lie. My ancestor died trying to unite our peoples. Your ancestor murdered her mate and started a war to prevent that unity. Which of these legacies do you really want to continue? Darius moved to stand beside his father, but his silver eyes were troubled. Princess Lyra speaks of unity, but look around you, he said, his voice heavy with regret rather than triumph. Even faced with proof of ancient crimes, our people remain divided. Perhaps that's the real truth, that we're too different, too set in our ways, to ever truly come together. Or perhaps, a new voice cut through the tension. It's time to try something that's never been attempted before. Every head turned toward the speaker, one of the abstaining house leaders, an elderly woman whose pack had remained neutral throughout the centuries of conflict. Elder Mooncrest, Thorne acknowledged respectfully. You wish to address the assembly? I do. The old woman moved slowly, but with dignity, to the center of the arena. I am Luna Mooncrest, keeper of the oldest bloodline records, guardian of laws that predate even the Moonhaven dynasty. Her voice, though aged, carried absolute authority. And I say that both claimants have proven themselves worthy in different ways. She turned to face the assembled houses. Princess Lyra embodies the hope of unity, the dream of healing old wounds. Prince Darius represents the hard truths of leadership, the strength to make difficult decisions. Both are needed. Both have legitimate claims. She through ancient blood right, he through 3 centuries of effective rule. What are you suggesting? Marcus demanded. Luna smiled, and suddenly Lyra could see the fierce young woman she must once have been. I suggest we stop trying to choose between them and instead require them to choose each other. The silence that followed was deafening. The ancient laws speak of joint rule in times of great crisis, Luna continued. A dual monarchy, balanced between competing philosophies, each serving as check and balance to the other. Her gaze moved between Lyra and Darius. A marriage alliance, not of political convenience, but of mutual respect and shared responsibility. Absolutely not. Kieran's voice cut through the amphitheater like a blade. Every eye turned to him as he stepped forward, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. Princess Lyra will not be sacrificed on the altar of political expedience. She's not a bargaining chip to be traded for stability. Guardian Blackthorne, Marcus Shadowfang's voice carried a warning. You overstep your bounds. My bounds are protecting the princess from all threats, Kieran replied, his hand moving to his sword, including political marriages designed to diminish her power. Darius stepped forward, and for a moment, Lyra thought the two men might actually come to blows in front of the entire supernatural world. But instead, the Shadowfang prince held up a hand for peace. The Guardian is right, Darius said quietly. Princess Lyra shouldn't be forced into any arrangement she doesn't choose freely. His silver eyes met hers across the space between them. But the offer stands, cousin. Not as political expedience, but as a genuine attempt to heal the wounds between our houses. Lyra felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, the pressure of decisions that would echo through history. The eclipse overhead was reaching totality, the blood moon casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow. You want my answer now? She asked. The prophecy speaks of choices made under the bleeding moon, Elder Thorne said sullenly. If we're to fulfill it rather than simply endure it, yes, the choice must be made now. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the pull of destiny and the weight of consequences. When she opened them again, her decision was clear. I choose. She paused, looking at each face in turn, Kieran with his desperate hope, Darius with his resigned nobility, the assembly with their mixed expressions of anticipation and fear. I choose to reject the premise of your question. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. You ask me to choose between love and duty, between personal happiness and political stability, between the man I care for and the alliance that might bring peace. Lyra's voice grew stronger with each word. But those are false choices, born from the same kind of thinking that's kept our world divided for centuries. She moved to stand at the exact center of the arena, equidistant from all factions. The prophecy speaks of 2 paths, love's light or vengeance's call. But what if love isn't about personal romance? What if it's about love for our people, love for justice, love for the truth that sets us free? The grimoire in her hands began to glow brighter, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. I choose neither marriage alliance nor continued division. I choose a third path, one that's never been tried because it requires something our people have forgotten how to do. She looked directly at Darius. I choose to trust. Trust, he asked, his voice barely audible. Joint leadership, as Elder Mooncrest suggested, but not through marriage. Through partnership. Through the revolutionary idea that former enemies can work together without needing to become lovers or sacrifice their principles. Lyra turned to address the entire assembly. House Moonhaven and House Shadowfang, ruling together, each maintaining their independence while serving the greater good. And if we disagree on fundamental issues? Darius asked. Then we debate. We compromise. We find solutions neither of us could reach alone. Lyra's smile was radiant. We model the kind of cooperation we want to see from all our people. Marcus Shadowfang stepped forward, his expression skeptical. Pretty words, princess. But what assurance do we have that this partnership wouldn't simply devolve into the same conflicts that have plagued us for centuries? None, Lyra admitted freely. Except that the alternative is more of what we've already tried, and that hasn't worked. She gestured to the divided assembly. Look around you. 300 years of might makes right leadership, and we're still fractured, still weak, still hiding from a human world that grows stronger every day. She's right. A voice called from the crowd, one of the abstaining houses. The old ways aren't working. But this is unprecedented, another house leader protested. Joint rule between rival bloodlines. Everything worthwhile is unprecedented until someone tries it, Victor interrupted, his vampire pragmatism cutting through the uncertainty. The princess offers evolution instead of revolution. Partnership instead of conquest. Aurelius stepped forward, his face senses reading the currents of possibility in the air. The magic itself is intrigued by this choice. It carries the flavor of genuine change rather than mere shuffling of the same old patterns. All eyes turned to Darius. As the other claimant, his agreement would be essential for any joint rule to work. He was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes studying Lyra's face as if trying to read her soul. Finally, he spoke. You would trust me with power after everything my family has done? I would trust you to be better than your family's worst moments, Lyra replied. The same way I hope you would trust me to be better than mine. And your guardian? Darius's gaze flicked to Kieran. How does he feel about sharing your attention with a former enemy? Kieran stepped forward, his jaw tight, but his voice steady. If it's what the princess chooses, if it serves the greater good, then I support her decision. His golden eyes met Darius's directly. But understand this, my loyalty is to her, not to any political arrangement. If you betray that trust, you'll kill me, Darius finished with a slight smile. I would expect nothing less from a worthy guardian. The blood moon reached perfect totality overhead, casting the entire amphitheater in crimson light. In that moment of perfect eclipse, Darius extended his hand to Lyra. Partners? He asked. Lyra took his hand, feeling the crackle of power where their bloodlines touched. Partners. The moment their hands clasped, something extraordinary happened. Light erupted from their joined grip, not the harsh light of dominance, but the warm glow of cooperation. It spread outward in rippling waves, touching every person in the amphitheater, and where it touched, the divisions and animosities of centuries seemed to lighten, if only for a moment. The prophecy, Elder Thorn breathed. Love's unbroken chain. Not romantic love, but the love that binds all our people together. The assembly erupted in cheers, the sound rolling across the ancient stones like thunder. Houses that had been divided moments before were embracing, the abstainers were declaring support, and even some of the Shadowfang hardliners looked cautiously hopeful. But as the celebration began, Lyra caught sight of Marcus Shadowfang's expression. The older man was smiling and nodding as if pleased by the turn of events, but his eyes held depths of calculation that made her blood run cold. The eclipse was ending, the moon beginning to emerge from shadow. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the crisis averted, the future secured. So, why did Lyra feel like the real danger was just beginning? Chapter 8. The celebration at Shadowmere that night should have been joyous, supernatural beings of every kind mingling freely for the first time in centuries, toasting the new alliance and sharing stories of hope for the future. But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. She stood on the castle's highest balcony, watching the festivities below while her instincts screamed warnings she couldn't quite articulate. The crown of whispers on her brow picked up fragments of conversation from the crowd, most of it positive, but there were undercurrents of discord that made her mark burn with unease. Having second thoughts? Darius's voice came from behind her, smooth and careful. She turned to find him approaching with 2 goblets of wine, his ceremonial armor replaced by elegant clothes that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. There was something in his silver eyes that hadn't been there during the trials, a depth of calculation that reminded her uncomfortably of his father. "Should I be?" she asked, accepting the wine but not drinking it. "That depends on how much you actually trust me." He moved to stand beside her at the balcony's edge, close enough that she could sense the supernatural power radiating from his skin. "Because I have to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Lyra's hand instinctively moved to the blade of binding at her side. "What kind of something?" "My father isn't planning to honor our alliance." Darius's voice was quiet, but she could hear the pain beneath his careful control. "He sees tonight's agreement as a temporary setback, not a permanent solution." "What do you mean?" "He's already sent messages to the rogue houses, the ones who profit from chaos and division. By dawn, there will be incidents designed to make it look like our partnership is failing." Darius took a sip of his wine, his expression grim. "Attacks on neutral territories, supposedly ordered by House Moonhaven. Raids on loyal pack lands, supposedly authorized by House Shadowfang." Lyra felt ice forming in her veins. He's going to sabotage the alliance before it has a chance to work. Within a week, the supernatural world will be convinced that joint rule is impossible. The houses will demand a return to strong, singular leadership, and my father will be waiting to provide it. "Why are you telling me this?" Lyra studied his face, trying to read the truth in his expression. "If Marcus succeeds, you inherit everything he's built." Darius was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the revelry below. "Because I meant what I said tonight. About being better than our family's worst moments." He turned to meet her gaze directly. "And because I think you might be the first person in 3 centuries who actually believes change is possible." "What do you want me to do with this information?" "Help me stop him." The words came out in a rush, as if Darius was afraid he'd lose courage if he waited. Not as political allies, not as co-rulers, but as friends. People who want the same thing even if we disagree on how to get there. Lyra set down her untouched wine and moved closer to him. "This could be a trap. A way to get me to act against your father, so you can swoop in as the reasonable alternative." "It could be," he admitted. "But it's not. And deep down, I think you know that." She did know it, though she couldn't explain how. Something in his voice, in the way he held himself, spoke to a sincerity that was impossible to fake. "What does Marcus have planned exactly?" "Tomorrow night, there's going to be an attack on the Ravencrest territory. They were one of the abstaining houses, still making up their minds about the new alliance. The attackers will be wearing Moonhaven colors and using magic that mimics your bloodline signature. And you'll conveniently arrive just in time to drive them off, proving that Shadowfang protection is more reliable than Moonhaven promises."
Exactly.
"Except I won't be arriving to drive them off. I'll be there to capture them and expose the deception." Darius's smile was sharp. "My father taught me to be ruthless in pursuit of power. He forgot to teach me that power obtained through deception isn't worth having." A new voice cut through their conversation. "Forgive the interruption, but we have a problem." They turned to find Kieran approaching, his expression grim and his hand resting on his sword hilt. Behind him came Victor and Aurelius, both looking equally troubled. "What kind of problem?" Lyra asked. 3 of the abstaining houses just left," Victor reported. "Quietly, without fanfare, but they're gone. Their delegations packed up and departed within the last hour." "Spooked by something?" Aurelius added, his face senses reading the lingering traces of fear in the air. "They received messages that sent them fleeing into the night." Kieran's golden eyes fixed on Darius with suspicion. "What did those messages say?" "I can guess," Darius replied grimly. "Probably warnings about staying too close to the unstable Moonhaven princess. Suggestions that her magical awakening might be more dangerous than anyone realizes." "You seem very well informed about these supposed messages," Kieran observed, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Because I know how my father operates." Darius met the Guardian's hostile stare without flinching. He's been manipulating supernatural politics for decades. Fear is his favorite weapon. "And we're supposed to just trust that you're different." Victor's frost-pale eyes were skeptical. No, Lyra said before Darius could respond. We're supposed to verify. She turned to her partner in rule. You say there's going to be an attack tomorrow night. Give us details, location, timing, how many attackers. The Ravencrest border settlement, about 2 hours after midnight. 12 attackers, all enhanced with dark magic to mimic royal bloodline signatures. They'll strike the main gathering hall when most of the pack is asleep. Aurelius stepped forward, his otherworldly senses focused intently on Darius. He speaks truth, the Fey Lord said after a moment. At least, he believes what he's telling us. Belief isn't the same as accuracy, Kieran pointed out. Then we'll find out tomorrow night, Lyra decided. We'll be there waiting. All of us. Victor asked. All of us. If Darius is telling the truth, we stop the attack and expose Marcus's deception. If he's lying. She looked directly at her supposed partner. Then we deal with that betrayal too. Darius nodded slowly. Fair enough. But there's one more thing you need to know. The attackers won't be ordinary wolves enhanced with magic. They'll be ferals. The word hit like a physical blow. Even Kieran, normally unflappable, went pale. Ferals. Victor hissed. Those haven't been seen in over a century. What are ferals? Lyra asked, though she had a sinking feeling she didn't want to know the answer. Werewolves who've been stripped of their humanity through dark ritual, Aurelius explained, his beautiful face grim with distaste. They retain supernatural strength and cunning, but lose all capacity for mercy, reason, or restraint. They're living weapons, perfect for attacks that need to seem random and savage. The process of creating them was banned by every house after the War of Broken Crowns, Kieran added. The fact that Marcus has access to ferals means he's been planning this for much longer than just tonight. How long? Lyra demanded, turning to Darius.
Years.
Maybe decades. His voice was hollow with the weight of realization. Every time I thought he was being cautious or strategic, he was actually preparing for war. Building resources, cultivating allies, creating weapons. Darius looked at his hands as if seeing blood on them. I've been helping him without knowing it. Which is why our cooperation now is so important, Lyra said firmly. You can't change what you didn't know, but you can choose what to do with the knowledge you have now. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. Looking down, they saw Seraphina approaching the castle at a run, her usually composed demeanor shattered by urgency. That can't be good, Victor muttered. They hurried downstairs to meet her in the Great Hall, where her first words confirmed their worst fears. Princess, we've lost contact with 4 more houses, Seraphina reported breathlessly. Their communication crystals have gone dark, and the scouts I sent to check on them haven't returned. How long ago? Kieran demanded. The first one went silent 3 hours ago. The others followed at regular intervals. Seraphina's expression was grim. It's too coordinated to be coincidence. Marcus is moving faster than expected, Darius said quietly. He's not waiting for tomorrow night to begin undermining the alliance. What do you mean? Lyra asked. The houses that went silent, they were all ones that voted for you tonight. He's either capturing or eliminating your supporters before they can consolidate their loyalty. The implications hit Lyra like a physical blow. He's starting a war. He's finishing one, Darius corrected grimly. The war that began 300 years ago when Morwen chose power over peace. My father never intended to let your family reclaim the throne. Tonight's ceremony was just theater to give him legal justification for what comes next. Which is the systematic elimination of everyone who supported your claim. When the dust settles, there will be no one left to challenge Shadowfang rule, and history will record that the alliance failed because Princess Lyra was too weak to protect her own allies. Fury blazed through Lyra's veins, hot and clean and utterly focused. Not if I get to him first. Princess, Kieran warned, recognizing the dangerous light in her eyes. We need a plan, not a suicide charge. I have a plan. Lyra turned to face all of them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally accepted the full weight of her destiny. We save the houses that are still free. We expose Marcus's betrayal to the entire supernatural world. And then we end this once and for all.
How?
Victor asked. By being exactly what Marcus fears most, united. Lyra's smile was sharp as the blade of binding. He's counting on us to fracture under pressure, to turn on each other when things get difficult. Instead, we're going to prove that the alliance isn't just pretty words, it's the future. The Ravencrest attack tomorrow night, Aurelius said, understanding dawning in his galaxy-deep eyes. We don't just stop it, we turn it into a trap.
Exactly.
We let Marcus spring his ambush, then spring one of our own. Lyra looked at each of her allies in turn. Vampire speed and strength. Fame magic and illusion. Werewolf loyalty and coordination. All working together to catch the ferals and trace them back to whoever created them. It's dangerous, Serafina warned. If we're wrong about Darius's information, if this is a trap within a trap, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Lyra interrupted. But I'd rather die fighting for something I believe in than live in a world where fear and deception win. Darius stepped forward. For what it's worth, you won't be fighting alone. Whatever else happens, whatever you think of me personally, I met my oath tonight. Partners until the end. Even if it means going against your own father? Especially then. His silver eyes were hard as winter stars. 3 centuries of my family's rule built on lies is enough. It's time for the truth, no matter how much it costs. Outside, the celebration continued, supernatural beings dancing and laughing in the moonlight, unaware that war had already begun in the shadows around them. But in the great hall of Shadowmere, 5 beings from 4 different species stood united in purpose, ready to fight for a future that none of them could fully envision but all of them desperately wanted. The real test of their alliance was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Ravencrest settlement lay in darkness when Lyra and her allies arrived, hidden by Aurelius's fake glamour in the forests surrounding the peaceful community. The Pack's territory was nestled in a valley between rolling hills, their homes built in harmony with the natural landscape, stone cottages with gardens that seemed to glow softly in the starlight. They have no idea what's coming, Kieran murmured, his golden eyes scanning the quiet settlement. That's the point, Victor replied grimly. The attack needs to look random, unprovoked. Maximum shock value. Lyra crouched beside them, her newly awakened senses picking up the peaceful rhythms of the sleeping pack. Children dreaming in their beds, elders sharing quiet conversations by dying fires, young couples stealing moments of intimacy in the darkness. All of it about to be shattered by Marcus Shadowfang's ambition. Where are they? She whispered to Darius, who was scanning the hillsides with supernatural focus. Coming from the north. I can smell the dark magic from here. It leaves a signature like burned copper and rotting meat. His silver eyes found hers in the darkness. Are you ready for this? Ferals aren't like normal werewolves. They feel no pain, no fear, no mercy. Once the ritual that creates them is complete, they're essentially already dead. Then we put them to rest, Lyra said simply. The first sign of attack came not as sound, but as absence of sound, the sudden silence of night creatures who sensed predators approaching. Then came the howls, but these weren't the calls of any natural wolf. They were sounds of pure savagery, devoid of intelligence or emotion, the voices of beasts wearing the shapes of men. There, Aurelius pointed to shadows moving down the hillside with inhuman speed. 12 of them, just as predicted. The ferals moved in perfect coordination, their enhanced bodies carrying them toward the settlement with deadly grace. In the starlight, Lyra could see that they still looked like werewolves, but something was fundamentally wrong with them. Their eyes glowed not with the warm gold of her kind, but with sickly green fire. Their movements were too fluid, too predatory, lacking the human consciousness that gave shape to normal werewolf behavior. Remember the plan? Lyra breathed to her allies. Let them begin the attack, then we spring the trap. We need at least one alive for questioning. The first feral reached the settlement's edge and immediately smashed through the window of the nearest cottage. Screams erupted from within, a family awakened to nightmare. The other ferals spread out with military precision, each targeting a different building. Now, Lyra commanded. They moved as one, vampire speed, fey magic, werewolf coordination all working in perfect harmony. Victor became a blur of motion, his supernatural strength allowing him to tackle 2 ferals simultaneously. Aurelius conjured nets of starlight that trapped 3 more in bonds that burned their corrupted flesh. Kieran and Darius fought back-to-back, their combined skill overwhelming the ferals' raw savagery. But it was Lyra who provided the turning point. As she moved through the battle, the blade of binding in her hand seemed to sing with purpose. The starlight metal cut through dark magic like it was nothing more than shadow, and wherever she struck, the ferals didn't just fall, they seemed to find peace, their tortured howls fading into grateful silence. They're suffering, she realized with horror. The ritual that created them. They're trapped in their own bodies, watching themselves commit atrocities they can't control. All the more reason to end their torment quickly, Darius called, driving his claws through a feral's heart with surgical precision. Within minutes, 11 of the 12 attackers were down. The last one, caught in Aurelius's starlight bonds, writhed and snarled but couldn't break free. That was almost too easy, Victor observed, wiping dark blood from his hands. Because it wasn't the real attack, a new voice said from the darkness. Everyone spun to see a figure emerging from the shadows, tall, ancient, wearing robes that seemed to be woven from darkness itself. When he stepped into the starlight, Lyra's blood ran cold. His face was handsome in an ageless way, but his eyes held depths of malevolence that made her mark burn with warning. "Who are you?" she demanded, raising the blade of binding. "I am Lord Malachar Voidheart," the figure replied with a bow that was somehow mocking. Former advisor to Princess Morwen, architect of the War of Broken Crowns, and the true power behind House Shadowfang for the last 3 centuries. "That's impossible," Darius breathed. "You'd have to be over 400 years old?" "Indeed." Malachar's smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too white. The dark rituals that create ferals can also extend life indefinitely, though the price. He gestured to his unnaturally pale skin. "Well, one makes sacrifices for power. You're the one who's been controlling Marcus," Lyra realized. "Controlling is such an ugly word. I prefer guiding. The Shadowfang line has been quite useful, but they've always lacked the vision for truly grand designs." His gaze fixed on her with hungry intensity. "Unlike you, last daughter of Moonhaven, your power calls to me across the centuries." "What do you want?" Kieran demanded, moving protectively in front of Lyra. "What I've always wanted, the complete reunification of the supernatural world under a single, unchallenged authority. Your little alliance experiment tonight showed me that such unity is possible, but only under the right leadership." "And you think you're that leadership?" Victor's voice dripped contempt. "I know I am. I've spent 300 years carefully weakening every supernatural faction, keeping them divided and suspicious while I gathered power." Malachar raised his hand, and darkness seemed to flow from his fingertips. "The ferals were just the beginning. I have armies of the enhanced, the corrupted, the magically bound. Enough to conquer every territory from here to the ancient homelands. Then why reveal yourself now?" Aurelius asked, his face senses reading the currents of power swirling around the dark sorcerer. "Because tonight proved that Princess Lyra has the potential to actually unite our people, something that would be inconvenient for my plans." Malachar's expression grew coldly amused. "I had hoped to manipulate her as easily as I did the Shadowfang line, but she's proven disappointingly independent. So you decided to eliminate me instead." "Oh, not eliminate. Transform." The darkness around Malachar intensified. "I'm going to offer you the same gift I gave Morwen all those centuries ago, the power to see clearly, without the weakness of sentiment clouding your judgment." "Morwen refused you," Lyra said, understanding flooding through her. "That's why you had to manipulate her through lies and poison instead of direct corruption." "Clever girl." "Yes, your ancestor proved frustratingly resistant to enhancement. But you." His eyes glowed with unholy light. "You've already been touched by ancient magic, awakened to powers beyond normal werewolf limits. The corruption will take hold much more easily." "Never," Lyra snarled, but even as she said it, she could feel something wrong in the air around them. The darkness wasn't just visual, it was seeping into her skin, her lungs, her thoughts. "You don't have a choice," Malachar laughed. The ritual began the moment I appeared. My centuries of preparation, my accumulated power, all focused on this single moment of transformation. The world began to blur around the edges. Lyra could hear her allies fighting something, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. The darkness was inside her now, whispering seductive promises of power without conscience, strength without restraint. You could end all suffering, the darkness whispered. Unite the supernatural world through fear rather than love. No more uncertainty, no more weakness, no more painful choices. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. She could see herself transformed, terrible and beautiful, ruling over a world where conflict had ended because everyone was too terrified to oppose her will. But then she heard it, Kieran's voice, distant but desperate. "Princess, stay with me. Remember who you are." And suddenly she could feel it, the bond between them, the connection that had nothing to do with oaths or magic or destiny. The simple, human love of someone who saw all her flaws and fears and chose to stand beside her anyway. Love's unbroken chain, she thought, and the darkness recoiled as if burned. "No," she said aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I remember who I am. I am Lyra Moonhaven, daughter of the moon, bridge between worlds. And I choose love over power, unity over domination, hope over despair." The blade of binding in her hand erupted with silver fire, and the darkness around her shattered like glass. Malachar staggered backward, his ancient face twisted with fury and disbelief. "Impossible. No one has resisted the corruption ritual at such close range." "Maybe no one ever had enough to fight for before," Lyra replied, moving toward him with deadly purpose. But the dark sorcerer wasn't finished. With a gesture, he summoned more ferals from the shadows, dozens of them, surrounding Lyra and her allies in a circle of corrupted flesh and sickly green eyes. "If I cannot have you as an ally," Malachar snarled, "then I'll settle for your death. And the death of everyone who dared stand with you." The second wave of battle began, but this time they were outnumbered and surrounded. Even working together, even with their supernatural abilities, there were simply too many enemies. "We need to retreat," Victor called, his vampire's speed barely keeping him ahead of snapping jaws and raking claws. "There's nowhere to run," Kieran replied grimly, standing back to back with Darius as they fought off attackers from all sides. "Then we make our stand here," Lyra declared. "If this is where it ends, at least it ends with us fighting for something we believe in." But as the ferals closed in for the killing blow, something extraordinary happened. Light blazed across the battlefield, not the silver fire of the royal bloodline, but the warm gold of ordinary werewolves standing together. The Ravencrest pack had awakened, and instead of fleeing, they had come to fight beside their would-be protectors. For the Alliance. Luna Ravencrest howled, leading her pack in a charge that scattered the ferals like leaves before a storm. And she wasn't alone. From every direction, other packs were arriving, the houses that had voted for Lyra, the ones that had abstained, even some who had supported Darius, but now saw the true enemy clearly. "Impossible," Malachar breathed, his ancient confidence finally cracking. "They should be scattered, afraid, turning on each other." "They're united," Lyra said simply. "For the first time in 3 centuries, they're truly united. And that's something all your dark magic can't overcome." The battle that followed was like nothing the supernatural world had seen since the War of Broken Crowns. But this time, instead of species fighting species, they fought as one, werewolves and vampires and fae all working together to drive back the darkness that had manipulated them for so long. When the last feral fell and the ancient enemy finally fled into shadows that could no longer protect him, the silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. "Is it over?" someone called from the crowd of allies. "This part is," Lyra replied, looking at the faces around her, tired, bloodied, but hopeful in a way they hadn't been for centuries. "The real work starts now." Chapter 10. Dawn broke over the Ravencrest settlement in shades of gold and rose, painting the aftermath of battle in gentle light that seemed almost apologetic after the violence of the night. Lyra stood in the center of what had become an impromptu gathering of the supernatural world, where wolf packs, vampire covens, fey courts, and other beings she was still learning to identify, all united by the shared experience of fighting against true darkness. "The wounded are being tended," Seraphina reported, approaching with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration in her voice. "Surprisingly few casualties, considering what we faced. The Unity magic seems to have protected us in ways we don't fully understand yet." "Unity magic?" Lyra asked, though part of her already knew what Seraphina meant. She could feel it, a warm, golden thread connecting her to every person who had stood with them in the battle. It was different from the guardian bond she shared with Kieran, less personal, but somehow just as strong. "The prophecy spoke of love's unbroken chain," Victor explained, joining them with Aurelius at his side. Both looked tired but genuinely happy for the first time since Lyra had met them. "I think we're seeing what that actually means, not just romantic love, but the bonds that form when people choose to trust and protect each other." Darius approached from where he'd been coordinating search efforts for any remaining ferals. His silver eyes were haunted, but there was also a lightness in his bearing that hadn't been there before. "My father is gone," he reported quietly. "The Shadowfang stronghold is empty. He fled sometime during the night, along with his most loyal supporters." "Do you think he went to find Malachar?" Lyra asked. "Probably. Marcus has always been a follower, not a leader. Without someone to take orders from, he's essentially powerless." Darius's expression was complex, grief and relief warring in his features. "Part of me hoped he might choose differently when faced with the truth." "People can only choose change when they're ready for it," Lyra said gently. "You can't force someone to be better than they want to be." "Wise words from someone who's barely been in our world for 2 weeks," a new voice observed. They turned to find Elder Thorne approaching, supported by 2 younger werewolves but walking under his own power. The ancient keeper of laws looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, but his eyes were bright with something Lyra realized was hope. "Elder Thorne," she said respectfully, "how are you feeling?" Like someone who's lived to see a prophecy fulfilled in ways he never expected, the old werewolf replied with a slight smile. "The ancient texts speak of the last daughter of Moonhaven bringing unity to the scattered children of the night, but I always assumed it would be through conquest or political maneuvering. Instead, she did it by being willing to die for people she barely knew," Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion as he joined their group. "By choosing to stand between innocent families and monsters, even when she was outnumbered." "The true mark of a leader," Elder Thorne agreed. "Not the willingness to send others to their deaths, but the willingness to risk your own life for those you're meant to protect." A commotion near the settlement's edge drew their attention. A group of riders was approaching, not the supernatural beings who had come to fight, but humans on ordinary horses, wearing the distinctive leather armor of the Hunters Guild. "This could be a problem," Victor muttered, his vampire instincts immediately alert for threat. "Or an opportunity," Lyra said thoughtfully, studying the approaching riders. "How long has it been since humans and supernatural beings tried to actually talk to each other instead of just fighting or hiding?" "Centuries," Aurelius replied. "Not since before the War of Broken Crowns scattered us to the winds." "Then maybe it's time to try something new." Lyra walked forward to meet the human delegation, aware that every supernatural being in the settlement was watching to see how their newly acknowledged leader would handle this first test of interspecies diplomacy. Behind her, she could feel Kieran's protective tension and Darius's readiness for violence, but also the steady support of all her allies. The lead rider dismounted as she approached, a woman perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Her hand rested on her sword hilt, but she made no move to draw it. "I am Captain Sarah Blackwood of the Hunters Guild," the woman announced. "I'm looking for the one called Princess Lyra Moonhaven." "I am she," Lyra replied calmly. "What brings the Hunters Guild to Ravencrest territory?" "Curiosity, mostly." Captain Blackwood's eyes scanned the settlement, taking in the mixture of species working together to tend wounds and repair damage. "We felt the magic last night, a surge of power unlike anything in recorded history. When we investigated, we found evidence of a battle between your people and something else. Corrupted werewolves called ferals," Lyra said honestly. created by a dark sorcerer who's been manipulating supernatural politics for centuries. Captain Blackwood's eyebrows rose. You're telling me the truth. Just like that. Would you prefer I lie? Most of your kind do, when dealing with humans. The captain's voice was carefully neutral. We're used to misdirection, half-truths, and outright deception. Most of my kind have been hiding from humans for 300 years, Lyra pointed out. Fear makes people do things they're not proud of. And what about you, princess? Are you afraid of humans? Lyra considered the question seriously. I'm afraid of misunderstanding. I'm afraid of violence born from ignorance on both sides. I'm afraid of the damage that fear can do when it's allowed to fester. She met the captain's eyes directly. But I'm not afraid of you, if that's what you're asking. Captain Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, studying Lyra's face as if trying to read her soul. Finally, she spoke. The guild has been tracking supernatural activity for generations. We know about your people's civil wars, your scattered pacts, your hidden territories. She glanced around at the diverse gathering behind Lyra. But this is something new. Cooperation between species that have been enemies for centuries. Unity where there was once only division. Change has to start somewhere, Lyra said simply. Indeed. The captain's hand moved away from her sword. The guild council sent me to assess whether this new development represents a threat to human settlements. And what's your assessment? Captain Blackwood looked around again, taking in the careful way vampires and werewolves were working together to distribute food, the Fae using their magic to heal injured pack members regardless of species, the overall atmosphere of exhausted but genuine cooperation. My assessment, she said slowly, is that for the first time in 3 centuries, there might be someone in the supernatural world worth talking to instead of just fighting. A ripple of surprise ran through the gathered supernatural beings. This was not how encounters with the Hunters Guild typically went. The council would be interested in opening formal communications, Captain Blackwood continued. Not treaties or alliances, we're not ready for that. But dialogue. A chance for both sides to understand each other better before the next crisis forces us into conflict. I'd welcome that opportunity, Lyra replied, though she could sense the tension radiating from some of her allies. Centuries of persecution weren't easily forgotten. There would need to be safeguards, neutral meeting grounds, guarantees of safe passage. The captain's military practicality was showing, and proof that you can actually speak for the supernatural community as a whole, not just your own faction. She speaks for all of us, a voice called from the crowd, Elder Thorne, supported by his walking aides but projecting authority that reached every corner of the settlement. By acclamation of the assembled houses, by right of ancient bloodline, and by proof of worthiness in battle, Princess Lyra Moonhaven is acknowledged as High Queen of the supernatural realm. The formal declaration sent a shock through Lyra. She'd known this moment might come, but hearing it stated so officially, in front of both supernatural beings and human witnesses, made it real in a way that all the trials and ceremonies hadn't. High Queen. Captain Blackwood looked skeptical. That's quite a title for someone so young. Age doesn't determine wisdom, Darius said, stepping forward to stand beside Lyra. And sometimes it takes someone young enough to still believe in impossible things to actually achieve them. You're the Shadowfallen Prince, the captain observed. Intelligence reports suggested you and the princess were rivals. We were, Darius admitted. Now we're partners. Proof that even the deepest divisions can be bridged with enough trust and shared purpose. Captain Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to report this to the council. It will take time for them to decide how to proceed. We understand, Lyra replied. 3 centuries of mistrust won't be overcome in a single conversation. But the fact that we're having this conversation at all feels like progress. Indeed. The captain remounted her horse, then paused. Princess, or should I say, Your Majesty, there's something else you should know. The human world is changing too. Technology, communication, global connectivity. The days when our peoples could remain completely separate are coming to an end whether we plan for it or not. Then it's better if we plan for it together, Lyra said. After the human delegation departed, the supernatural community remained in the Raven Crest settlement for the rest of the day, working together to process what had happened and plan for what came next. As evening approached, Lyra found herself standing once again on high ground overlooking the gathering, but this time she wasn't alone. Kieran stood beside her, his presence as solid and reassuring as always. "Any regrets about accepting the crown?" he asked quietly. "Ask me in 100 years," Lyra replied with a smile. "Right now, I'm too busy trying to figure out how to actually do the job." "You'll figure it out. You always do." "We'll figure it out," she corrected. "I can't do this alone, Kieran. I don't want to do this alone." He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun. "Are you asking me to stay as your guardian, or as something more?" "I'm asking you to stay as yourself," Lyra said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Guardian, friend, partner, lover. Whatever labels we use don't matter as much as the fact that I love you and I want you beside me for whatever comes next. Even if what comes next includes dealing with ancient sorcerers, political intrigue, and the challenge of uniting species that have been enemies for centuries." "Especially then," Lyra laughed. "I'm going to need someone to keep me grounded when all the power and responsibility goes to my head." Kieran's kiss tasted like starlight and promises, and when they broke apart, Lyra could see their future spreading out before them, uncertain, challenging, but full of hope in a way the supernatural world hadn't known for centuries. Below them, werewolves and vampires and fae continued working together, building something new from the ashes of the old. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing trust over fear, unity over division, love over hate. The last daughter of Moonhaven had awakened, and with her, a new age had begun. Chapter 11. 3 months after the Battle of Ravencrest, Shadowmere had transformed from a hidden refuge into the beating heart of a new supernatural civilization. The ancient castle's halls bustled with activity as representatives from dozens of species worked together to establish the frameworks of their unified society. Where once there had been empty chambers and echoing silence, now there were council rooms filled with heated but respectful debate, workshops where fae artisans taught vampire craftsmen new techniques, and training grounds where werewolf packs learned to fight alongside beings they'd once considered enemies. Lyra stood in the newly restored throne room, but she wasn't alone on the dais. The original Moonstone throne had been joined by a second seat carved from shadow-touched obsidian, Darius's contribution to their joint rule, symbolic of the balance they'd achieved between light and darkness, tradition and change. "The Northern Territory's integration is proceeding ahead of schedule," Darius reported, consulting the stack of reports that seemed to multiply daily. "The vampire clans have established 3 new settlements, and the fae courts have opened permanent portals to their realm for the first time in centuries." "Any resistance?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer from the morning briefings. "Less than expected. It seems that 3 centuries of division and weakness have convinced most of our people that unity is preferable to continued isolation." He looked up from his papers. "Though we did have an interesting development in the Eastern Reach." "What kind of development?" "A human settlement requested permission to establish formal trade relations with the local werewolf pack. Apparently, word of our meeting with Captain Blackwood has spread, and some human communities are beginning to see opportunity where they once saw only threat." Lyra felt a familiar surge of hope. The changes they were implementing weren't just theoretical anymore. They were taking root in the real world, creating possibilities that hadn't existed for centuries. "Speaking of humans," Kieran said as he entered the throne room, "we've received a formal invitation from the Hunters Guild Council. They want to hold the first official human supernatural summit in neutral territory." "Where?" Darius asked practically. "The ruins of Moonfall Castle, the original seat of your dynasty," Kieran replied to Lyra. "They suggested it because it's symbolic of both our shared history and the need to build something new from old foundations." The idea sent a chill through Lyra. Moonfall Castle was where her ancestors had ruled before the War of Broken Crowns, where Princess Celeste and Adrian Blackwood had planned their doomed wedding, where centuries of hope and tragedy were literally built into the stones. "It's appropriate," she said finally. The place where the old alliance died can be where the new one is born. If we can make it work, Darius cautioned, the humans will be bringing their own agenda, their own fears and prejudices. 3 centuries of mutual mistrust won't disappear just because we're willing to talk. No, Lyra agreed. But every journey starts with a single step. And at least this time, we're taking that step together. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention to the windows, where they could see a delegation arriving that made Lyra's heart skip with joy. Victor was leading a group of vampires, but these weren't the somber, isolated beings who had first come to Shadowmere. These vampires laughed and joked with the werewolf guards, their pale faces bright with an animation she'd never seen before. The Blackwood clan integration is going better than anyone hoped, Victor reported when he joined them in the throne room. We've established the first mixed settlements in over 3 centuries, vampires and werewolves living side by side, sharing resources and protection. Any problems? Lyra asked. Surprisingly few. It turns out that when you remove the artificial barriers that kept our species apart, we actually complement each other quite well. Vampire night vision and hearing combined with werewolf strength and tracking abilities make for formidable hunting parties. And vampire preservation techniques paired with werewolf agricultural knowledge means food security for everyone. It's almost like we were meant to work together, Darius observed with dry humor. The old alliance wasn't just political convenience, Aurelius added, materializing from the Fey realm with his usual dramatic flair. It was recognition of genuine compatibility between our species. When we cooperate instead of compete, we're all stronger. Speaking of cooperation, Seraphina said, entering with her arms full of scrolls and her expression bright with excitement, I have news from the scholars. They've been researching the ancient texts, trying to understand exactly what happened during the Unity magic at Ravencrest.
And
Lyra prompted. It wasn't just emotional bonding. The magic actually created new neural pathways between participants, a kind of supernatural empathy network that allows allied beings to sense each other's emotional states and intentions across great distances. The implications of this hit Lyra like a physical blow. You mean everyone who fought with us that night is permanently connected? Not permanently, Seraphina clarified quickly. The bonds fade over time, without reinforcement. But they can be renewed and strengthened through continued cooperation and trust. A literal unity, Victor mused. Not just political or social, but magical. Which explains why the integration has been going so smoothly, Darius added. When you can actually feel that someone means you no harm, it's much easier to trust them. Lyra moved to the great windows that overlooked Shadowmere's grounds, watching as supernatural beings of every description worked together to build something that had never existed before, a truly integrated society where differences were celebrated rather than feared. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I haven't told any of you yet. The room grew still, everyone sensing the weight in her voice. I've been having dreams. Visions. Not of the past, but of possible futures. She turned to face them. I see humans and supernatural beings working together openly, no more hiding or pretending. I see cities where vampires and werewolves and fae live alongside humans, where children grow up knowing that magic is real and wonderful instead of something to fear. That sounds incredible, Kieran said softly. But I also see the darker possibilities. Malachar returning with armies of the corrupted. Human governments deciding that supernatural beings are too dangerous to coexist with. Wars that make the old conflicts look like skirmishes. Lyra's voice grew heavy. The choices we make now, the foundations we lay, they'll determine which future becomes real. No pressure, Darius said with gallows humor, but his silver eyes were serious. Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you all about. Lyra moved back to the twin thrones, but she didn't sit. Instead, she stood between them, symbolically balanced between old and new. The summit with the humans, it's not just about establishing diplomatic relations. It's about making a choice that will echo through history. What kind of choice? Aurelius asked. Whether to reveal the supernatural world to humanity as a whole, or continue the policy of secrecy and selective contact. Lyra looked at each of her advisors in turn. The visions show me that secrecy won't be sustainable much longer. Human technology is advancing too quickly. Their global communication networks are too comprehensive. Within a generation, maybe two, they'll discover us whether we're ready or not. Better to control the revelation than have it forced upon us, Victor agreed grimly. But the risks, Serafina began, are enormous, Lyra finished. Some humans will react with fear, hostility, even violence. Some supernatural beings will see exposure as the ultimate betrayal of everything they've sacrificed to remain hidden. We could trigger conflicts that make the War of Broken Crowns look minor. Or, Darius said thoughtfully, we could create a world where our children don't have to live in shadows, where strength comes from diversity instead of uniformity, where the old hatreds finally die because there's nothing left to sustain them. That's the future I want to build, Lyra said simply. But I can't do it alone, and I won't do it without the consent of our people. What are you proposing? Kieran asked. A grand assembly. Every supernatural community, every allied group, every individual who's been affected by the changes we've implemented. We lay out the choice clearly: gradual revelation and integration with humanity, or continued secrecy and separation, and we let them decide. Democracy, Aurelius said with something like wonder. When was the last time the supernatural world made a collective decision instead of following the dictates of whoever held the most power? Never, Elder Thorne said from the doorway, where he'd been listening with a kind of patience that came from centuries of experience. In all the histories, in all the records I've kept, there's never been a time when every supernatural being had an equal voice in determining their future. Then it's time, Lyra said with finality. Send out the call. Every pack, every coven, every court, every individual. 3 months from now, when the spring equinox provides the optimal magical conditions, we gather at Moonfall Castle, not just the leaders, but everyone. And we choose our destiny together. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility and terror in equal measure. What they were proposing was unprecedented, dangerous, revolutionary. It could unite the supernatural world in common purpose, or tear apart everything they'd worked to build. I'll send the messages to the vampire clans, Victor said finally. The Fey courts will hear the call, Aurelius added. I'll coordinate with the werewolf packs, Serafina volunteered. And I'll handle the logistics of hosting thousands of supernatural beings in one location without causing mass panic among local human populations, Darius said with a kind of dry practicality that had made their partnership work. Elder Thorne stepped fully into the room, his ancient eyes bright with something Lyra realized was pride. I'll begin preparing the historical records. If we're going to make this choice, our people should understand exactly what we're choosing between: the full truth of our past, the reality of our present, and the possibilities of our future. As her advisors dispersed to begin the monumental task of organizing the largest gathering in supernatural history, Lyra found herself alone with Kieran. He moved to stand beside her at the windows, his presence as steady and comforting as always. Are you scared? He asked quietly. Terrified, she admitted. What if they choose wrong? What if exposure leads to genocide? What if secrecy leads to slow extinction? What if I'm pushing too hard, too fast, changing things that should be left alone? What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do? He countered gently. What if the fact that you're scared means you understand the weight of what you're attempting, and that's exactly why you're the right person to attempt it? Lyra leaned into his warmth, drawing strength from the bond between them that had grown from duty to love to something deeper than either. Stay with me? Always, he promised, and in that simple word, she heard echoes of the vows they'd spoken in private ceremony just weeks before, not the political marriage that others had expected, but a personal commitment that belonged to them alone. Outside, the sun was setting over Shadowmere, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. In 3 months, everything would change. The supernatural world would make a choice that would determine not just their own fate, but the future of 2 species learning to see each other clearly for the first time in centuries. The last daughter of Moonhaven had awakened not just to her own destiny, but to the destiny of everyone who chose to follow her into an uncertain but hopeful future. The legacy was being reborn, one choice at a time. Chapter 12. The ruins of Moonfall Castle had been transformed into something that defied description. Where once crumbling stones had stood testament to ancient tragedy, now thousands of supernatural beings filled every available space: the restored Great Hall, the rebuilt courtyards, temporary pavilions that stretched across the surrounding fields like a city of silk and starlight. Werewolf packs from the furthest territories mingled with vampire clans that hadn't left their hidden enclaves in centuries. Fey courts materialized in groves of impossible beauty, while beings Lyra was still learning to identify shapeshifters, elemental spirits, ancient guardians of forgotten places, added their voices to the greatest gathering in supernatural history. At the center of it all, on a dais built from stones of the original throne room, Lyra stood before her people. She wore the crown of whispers and ceremonial robes that somehow managed to incorporate symbols from every major supernatural faction. But what struck the assembled thousands wasn't her regalia, it was the quiet confidence she radiated, the sense of someone who had grown into power rather than merely inherited it. "My friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly through magic that allowed every being present to hear her in their own tongue, "we gather today to make a choice that will echo through generations yet unborn. But before we decide our future, we must be clear about our past." Elder Thorn stepped forward, ancient scrolls floating around him in spirals of silver light. "Let the true history be known." His voice cracked with age but carried absolute authority. "For 3 centuries, we have lived with lies built upon the foundation of a single act of treachery." The story unfolded in words and images that painted themselves across the sky: Princess Celeste's genuine love for Adrian Blackwood, Morwen's jealous betrayal, the poisoning that destroyed not just 2 lives, but the hope of an entire civilization. When the truth had been laid bare, a sound rose from the assembled masses, not quite a howl, not quite a sigh, but something that encompassed centuries of grief finally acknowledged. The War of Broken Crowns was not the inevitable result of incompatible species, Lyra continued when the historical recitation was complete. It was the product of one person's choice to prioritize personal power over collective good. "We've spent 300 years paying the price for Morwen's betrayal, divided, weakened, hiding from a world that should have been our partner." Darius stepped forward to stand beside her. Over the months of joint rule, he had changed almost as much as she had, the cold calculation in his silver eyes replaced by something warmer, more hopeful. "House Shadowfang benefited from that division," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast assembly. "My family ruled over the fragments of what should have been a unified kingdom. But ruling over ruins isn't victory, it's just a slower form of defeat." A murmur ran through the crowd, supernatural beings who had lived their entire lives under Shadowfang authority, hearing their prince repudiate everything his ancestors had built. "Today we face the same choice that our ancestors faced centuries ago," Lyra continued. "Do we retreat into isolation, protecting ourselves from change by refusing to grow? Or do we embrace the risk of connection, the possibility of being hurt, in exchange for the chance to be truly alive?" Captain Sarah Blackwood stepped forward from where she'd been standing with a small delegation of human representatives, scientists, diplomats, even a few religious leaders who had been quietly informed of the supernatural world's existence as part of the gradual revelation process. "The human world has changed since our ancestors last tried to coexist," the captain said, her practical voice somehow managing to reach every corner of the vast gathering. "We have global communication now, shared challenges that cross all national boundaries. Climate change, pandemic disease, resource scarcity, problems that no single nation can solve alone. You believe supernatural involvement could help address these challenges?" Aurelius asked from where he stood with the Fey delegation. "I believe that hiding from each other has benefited no one," Captain Blackwood replied honestly. "Your people have abilities and knowledge that could revolutionize everything from medicine to environmental restoration. Our people have infrastructure and organizational systems that could help your scattered communities coordinate more effectively." "And the risks?" Victor called out, his vampire pragmatism cutting through the optimistic rhetoric. "What happens when human governments decide we're too dangerous to tolerate? What happens when religious extremists declare war on beings they see as demons?" "Then we face those challenges together," Lyra replied firmly. "The same way we've faced every crisis since the Battle of Ravencrest. not as separate species protecting our own interests, but as a unified community protecting each other. An ancient voice spoke from the crowd, Luna Mooncrest, the elder who had first proposed joint rule months ago. "I have lived through 3 centuries of secrecy and isolation," she said, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. "I have watched our numbers dwindle, our magic weaken, our young ones grow up ashamed of what they are. Hiding has not protected us, it has diminished us. But revelation could destroy us entirely," another voice countered, Marcus Thornfield, whose pack had abstained from the original vote and remained skeptical of the new alliance. "At least in hiding, we survive. In the open, we could face extinction." "We already face extinction," Serafina said, producing records that painted a grim picture. Birth rates declining across all supernatural species. Magical abilities weakening with each generation. Territory lost to human expansion with no ability to negotiate because they don't know we exist. "The slow death of secrecy or the quick death of exposure," someone called from the crowd. "Those are our only choices?" "No," Lyra said firmly, stepping to the very edge of the dais, so she was as close as possible to the assembled thousands. "There's a third choice. The choice to live, really live, openly and proudly, and in connection with the full richness of what existence has to offer." She gestured, and images began forming in the air above the assembly, not visions of the past, but glimpses of possible futures drawn from the prophetic dreams that had been growing stronger with each passing month. "I see human children learning alongside supernatural ones, both species enriched by the exchange of knowledge and perspective. I see vampire medical researchers using their enhanced senses to detect diseases decades before current human technology could find them. I see werewolf environmental scientists working with human climatologists to restore damaged ecosystems. I see fae artists collaborating with human creators to produce beauty beyond anything either could achieve alone." The images shifted, showing a world where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where the strengths of each species complemented rather than threatened the others. "But I also see the alternative," Lyra continued, and the images darkened. "Continued isolation leading to slow extinction. Or worse, discovery without preparation leading to panic, violence, and mutual destruction. The revelation doesn't have to be sudden or traumatic," Captain Blackwood added. "The human governments represented here are prepared to begin gradual disclosure, starting with scientific communities, expanding to international organizations, eventually reaching general populations as understanding grows. A generation-long process of careful integration," Victor mused. "It could work. It could fail catastrophically," Marcus Thornfield countered. "Everything could fail catastrophically," Darius pointed out. "The question is whether we want to fail while trying to build something better, or fail while clinging to something that's already dying." Elder Thorne raised his staff, calling for formal debate. For hours, voices rose from every corner of the assembly. Werewolf pack leaders spoke of territories lost to human development, of young ones who felt trapped between 2 worlds. Vampire lords described the slow weakening of their kind's abilities, the difficulty of maintaining secrecy in an age of surveillance technology. Fae nobles recounted the gradual closure of pathways between realms as human activity disrupted ancient magical sites. But there were also voices of hope. Young supernatural beings who had formed friendships with humans despite the taboos against contact. Elders who remembered stories of the old alliance and dreamed of seeing such cooperation again. Parents who wanted their children to grow up in a world where they didn't have to hide fundamental aspects of themselves. As the sun reached its zenith, the moment of perfect balance that marked the spring equinox, Lyra called for the formal vote. "By the ancient laws, by right of assembly, by the democratic principles we have chosen to embrace," she announced, "let every voice be heard. Those who choose gradual revelation and integration with humanity, let your answer ring out." The response was immediate and overwhelming, a sound like thunder as thousands of voices rose in unison. Integration. "Those who choose continued secrecy and separation, let your answer be known." A smaller but still significant number responded. Separation. Elder Thorne began the formal count, assisted by representatives from each major faction to ensure accuracy and fairness. The process took nearly an hour, but when the final tally was announced, the results were clear. By a margin of 7-3, Thorne declared, "The supernatural world chooses integration." The cheer that rose from the assembly was like nothing Lyra had ever heard. The sound of an entire civilization choosing hope over fear, growth over stagnation, connection over isolation. But even as she smiled at the victory, Lyra was aware of the faces in the crowd that showed disappointment, concern, even anger. A third of their people had voted against this path, and their fears and objections would need to be addressed if the integration was going to succeed. To those who supported separation, she called out when the celebration had died down enough for her to be heard. "I want you to know that your voices have been heard and your concerns will be respected. Integration will not be forced upon anyone. Those who choose to maintain traditional ways of life, who prefer the security of established communities, will be protected and supported. But we ask for your patience," Darius added, "and your wisdom as we navigate this transition. Your caution will serve as a valuable check against reckless optimism. Your experience will guide us away from preventable mistakes." As the formal assembly began to disperse, supernatural beings clustering in groups to discuss the implications of what they'd chosen, Lyra found herself approached by Captain Blackwood. "This is just the beginning," the human woman said quietly. "The real work starts now. Building trust, managing expectations, preventing the fear and misunderstanding that could destroy everything you've accomplished." "I know," Lyra replied. "But for the first time in 3 centuries, we're building instead of just surviving. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Kieran said, joining them with a smile that made Lyra's heart skip. "Our ancestors dreamed of this day, supernatural and human representatives standing together, planning a shared future instead of just managing separate conflicts." As the sun set over Moonfall Castle, painting the ruins and the thousands of beings gathered there in shades of gold and hope, Lyra felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders, not as a burden this time, but as wings. The last daughter of Moonhaven had awakened not just to her own power, but to the power of collective choice, shared courage, and love that transcended the boundaries between species. The ancient bloodline that had once ruled through divine right now served through democratic consent. The dynasty that had fallen through betrayal had been reborn through trust. And in the growing dusk, as supernatural beings and humans began the first tentative conversations about their shared tomorrow, the echoes of the old prophecy finally found their completion. Love's unbroken chain had been forged anew, and the scattered children of the night were united once again. The legacy was no longer sleeping. The legacy was awake, and it was beautiful. 1 year later, the Garden of New Moonfall, built on the ruins of the ancient castle but designed as a living symbol of growth rather than a monument to the past, bustled with activity that would have been impossible to imagine just a year before. Human children played alongside young werewolves, their laughter echoing off stone walls that had once witnessed only tragedy. Vampire scholars worked with human scientists under portable sunshades, their enhanced senses revolutionizing everything from medical diagnosis to archaeological discovery. Fae artists taught human students to see color in ways their eyes had never perceived, while human engineers helped Fae craftsmen understand the principles that could make their impossible creations stable in the mortal realm. Lyra stood on the balcony of the new administrative complex, watching the organized chaos below with a satisfaction that had grown deeper with each passing month. The integration hadn't been without challenges. There had been protests, political crises, even a few violent incidents when extremist groups on both sides had tried to derail the process. But for every setback, there had been 10 victories. For every voice raised in fear, there had been dozens speaking in hope. The latest polls show approval ratings for the integration at 78% among humans and 85% among supernatural beings, Serafina reported, joining her on the balcony with a stack of reports that never seemed to get smaller. The joint medical research initiatives alone have resulted in breakthrough treatments for 3 previously incurable diseases. "Any word from the deep territories?" Lyra asked. Some supernatural communities had chosen to maintain traditional ways of life despite the integration, and ensuring their voices remained heard required constant effort. Elder Mooncrest sends word that even the most traditional pacts are beginning to see benefits. Human agricultural techniques adapted for supernatural needs have improved crop yields by 40%. And the young ones? Seraphina smiled. Even in the most remote communities, the young ones are curious about the wider world. Curiosity is good, Kieran said, emerging from the administrative complex with their 6-month-old daughter in his arms. Little Luna gurgled with delight at seeing her mother, her eyes already showing flecks of the gold that marked her father's lineage mixed with the violet that spoke to her mother's royal heritage. How did the council meeting go? Lyra asked, taking their daughter and marveling again at the miracle of new life, not just Luna's birth, but the birth of an entire generation that would grow up in a world where cooperation between species was normal rather than revolutionary. 3 more nations have requested formal diplomatic relations, Kieran replied, and the UN is moving forward with the proposal to establish a Department of Supernatural Affairs. Darius handling the political complexity well? Better than well. I think he actually enjoys the challenge of international diplomacy. Who would have thought that a prince raised for war would turn out to be a natural peacemaker? As if summoned by their conversation, Darius himself appeared, but he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a woman Lyra was still getting used to seeing, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human geneticist who had been part of the first scientific exchange programs and had somehow managed to capture the heart of the most eligible supernatural bachelor in the world. The fertility clinic results are in, Elena announced without preamble, her scientific directness unchanged by her engagement to supernatural royalty. The hybrid birth rate is stabilizing at sustainable levels, and genetic analysis shows that human supernatural children are actually healthier than either parent population alone. Evolution in action, Darius added with a smile that was genuinely happy rather than politically calculated. Our species aren't just learning to coexist, we're literally becoming stronger together. Speaking of becoming stronger together, Victor said as he joined the group, the vampire-werewolf joint settlements have exceeded every projection. Crime is down, economic productivity is up, and social cohesion ratings are off the charts. And the Fae integration? Lyra asked. Proceeding beautifully, Aurelius replied, materializing from a portal that opened directly onto the balcony. Human artists exposed to Fae techniques are creating works that transcend anything previously achieved. And Fae exposure to human engineering principles has revolutionized our architecture. Lyra looked out over the garden again, watching as a group of teenagers, human and supernatural mixed together, worked on some kind of collaborative art project. One of them was using Fae magic to make paint colors shift and flow, while another employed werewolf strength to manipulate heavy sculptural elements, and a third documented the process with human technology that captured every nuance of the magical collaboration. Sometimes I can barely believe it's real, she said softly. It's real because we chose to make it real, Kieran replied, putting his arm around her as they watched their daughter reach for a butterfly that might or might not have been one of Aurelius's minor illusions. The prophecy said love would unite the scattered children of the night, Lyra mused. I think we're finally understanding what that really meant. Not just romantic love, Darius agreed. Love for justice, love for growth, love for the possibility of becoming better than we were. Love for the future we're building, Elena added, her hand finding Darius's. One choice at a time, Victor said. One generation at a time, Aurelius added. One day at a time, Lyra finished, kissing her daughter's forehead and feeling the weight of legacy transformed from burden to blessing. The ancient bloodline saga had ended not with conquest or domination, but with the simple revolutionary act of choosing hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over hate. And in the garden where human and supernatural children played together under a sun that shone equally on all beings, the future stretched ahead like an unwritten story, full of infinite possibility. The last daughter of Moonhaven had awakened. And so had the world. The end.